Chapter 4674. At the same time, Xiaotian also glanced at Huiyuti with greed. He did have some thoughts about Huiyuti, but he was not stupid. With his identity and background, it was not a problem to have a mistress other than Yao Jelly. But this mistress would definitely not be Huiyuti, unless Huiyuti had fallen, or her master, Lu Ziyu, had completely lost his power. Why would she follow him? Xiaotian. He had no intention of giving up on Yao Jelly. This girl was much more exciting when she was coquettish than those so-called girls. Moreover, their families were old friends. Coveting Huiyuti was purely a fantasy. The most important thing now was to serve Yao Jelly well. Only then would he be able to obtain more benefits and benefits. Let's go. Huiyuti nodded to Lin Yi, and the two immediately went back the way they came, parting ways with Yao Jelly and the others. Junior sister Yuti. Ren Zhongyan shouted angrily, but the other party did not turn her head at all and just waved her hand indifferently. Ren Zhongyan watched helplessly as Huiyuti left, especially with a potential love rival by her side. He suddenly had an urge to chase after her. He didn't want to give the two of them a chance to be alone. A man and a woman alone with Huiyuti. This was a scene that would only appear in his dreams. However, Ren Zhongyuan could not take this step in the end. After Huiyuti went back, he could still chase after her, but if he missed this opportunity, there would not be a second chance. Looking deeply at Huiyuti's back, Ren Zhongyan gritted his teeth and turned to follow the footsteps of Yao Jelly and Lu Ziyu. This time, he must get the longevity route. At that time, as long as he divided a little bit, he could let Huiyuti throw herself into his arms. The two sides parted ways. Lin Yi and Huiyuti walked for half an hour, until Lin Yi's divine sense could not lock on to the three people, and then he finally took a break. So, they don't know about the Thunder Xianrot Tan. I thought they were our competitors. Lin Yi suddenly said in a faint tone. Why should we tell them about such an important treasure as the Thunder Xianrot Tan? Wouldn't that be looking for trouble for myself? The few of them aren't easy to deal with. If they really find the Thunder Xian Vine, it's hard to guarantee that they won't have any thoughts that they shouldn't have. At that time, I will be outnumbered. Huiyuti shook her head. That might not be the case. At the very least, that Ren Zhongyuan will help you. Lin Yi smiled, but he was even more certain in his heart. For the Thunder Xian Vine this time, Huiyuti was probably preparing to borrow his 5 elements physique. Otherwise, Ren Zhongyuan and the other two were all at the peak of the nascent soul realm, and they were all disciples of the East Continent College who knew each other well. Even if she did not have a good relationship with Yao Jelly, it should not be a big problem if it was just a cooperation. At least, it would not be as unreliable as Huiyuti herself said. On the other hand, Lin Yi was just an expert at the peak of the early nascent soul realm. There was no friendship between the two sides. No matter how you looked at it, the three people were more suitable to cooperate with each other. The only difference was his 5 elements physique. However, what was the relationship between the 5 elements physique and the Thunder Xian Vine? This was a problem that needed to be clarified. Of course, Lin Yi did not intend to open his mouth to ask it this time. When it came in handy, the other party would naturally say that talking too much now would do more harm than good. Huiyuti was silent for a moment. After turning her head to look at Lin Yi, she changed the topic and said, Your strength seems to be very strong. Oh, isn't it just the peak of the early nascent soul realm? In front of you experts at the peak of the nascent soul realm, this is considered strong? Lin Yi curled his lips and smiled. For many geniuses who can challenge those who are stronger than them, the strength on the surface is nothing. I believe that you are this kind of person. Huiyuti smiled slightly, paused, and said, Thank you for before. It was nothing. Lin Yi waved his hand indifferently. Previously, when they were dealing with the humanoid vine, although he secretly helped in the chaos, others like Ren Zhongyuan could not see it, but after a few times, Huiyuti would definitely be able to feel it. Otherwise, she would be too slow. If that was the case, Lin Yi would really have to consider the matter of cooperation. If he cooperated with such a slow girl to find the Thunder Xian Vine, it would be fatal. Can I ask, out of curiosity, what exactly is your strength? As a partner, I think we should first clarify this matter so that we do not make mistakes during the operation. Huiyuti looked at Lin Yi with a burning gaze. As you can see, Lin Yi shrugged non-committally. Of course, he would not reveal his true strength to a stranger he met for the first time. Moreover, there was no need for him to lie. At the very least, he was at the peak of the early nascent soul realm. There was no doubt about this. I'm talking about your true strength. The humanoid vine, even a few of us, could not escape unscathed. Only you were not injured. If you say that you are at the peak of the early nascent soul realm, I will definitely not believe it. Huiyuti shook her head with certainty. I'm just good at body techniques. It can't hit me, so of course it won't get hurt. Lin Yi smiled nonchalantly. He didn't bother explaining and kept his mouth shut. Huiyuti looked deeply at Lin Yi and did not continue to ask. Now is not the time to get to the bottom of it. Since the other party was not willing to confess, then it was enough to know. While the two were talking, they had already returned to a fork in the road. Huiyuti took out a map from her backpack and compared it to the map. She nodded at Lin Yi and said, "This is the way." After saying that, she immediately led the way. Although it was a bit unreasonable for a girl to take the risk to lead the way, who asked Lin Yi to not know the route? Huiyuti would not tell him this kind of thing in advance. After the previous incident, Lin Yi had become a bit hidden in her heart. She still had to be careful. The sky gradually darkened, and the road ahead began to become a bit difficult to walk on. In addition to the fact that they had been on the road for 6 hours, both Huiyuti and Lin Yi were somewhat tired. With their strength, it did not matter how long they walked. The key was to advance in this place. Every step they took had to be careful and vigilant. Facing the monotonous desert scenery, they had to be on high alert at all times. After all, the previous humanoid vine was only a small warning. Who knew what kind of terrifying existence they would encounter next? Under this kind of omnipresent spiritual pressure, even a peak nascent soul expert would not be able to withstand it for a long time. Chapter 4675. Therefore, they had to find a way to cross as soon as possible, so that even if they couldn't get the Thunder Xianrot Tan, they wouldn't return empty-handed along the way. It was dusk. Although the sky was gray, the outline of the setting sun could be vaguely seen. Lin Yi couldn't help guessing what the gray was. It wasn't like sea fog, nor was it the unique miasma of the South Island. Looking carefully, there seemed to be a trace of blood in it, giving people the feeling that it was a cloud stained with blood. This was not impossible. After all, this was the ancient battlefield. Even if everything was lacking, there was absolutely no lack of blood and death chi. Suddenly, Huiyuti in front of him let out a groan, and then she fell to the ground without warning. What happened? Lin Yi couldn't help but be shocked. He didn't notice anything unusual, and the jade pendant didn't warn him. What the hell was this girl doing? Did she not give up and deliberately fell down to win his sympathy by pretending to be pitiful, so that she could take the opportunity to ask for more after she succeeded? Wasn't the hole in her brain a little too big? If he was such an easy person to be hooked, how could he bargain with her so quickly in the beginning? What was the point of doing this kind of superfluous thing? Looking at Huiyuti with a strange expression, Lin Yi stood behind her for a moment with his hands clasped. However, Huiyuti didn't get up by herself, nor did she have any intention of calling for help. Did something really go wrong? Lin Yi was a little surprised and walked to her with doubts. Only then did he find that Huiyuti's forehead was sweating, and her face was pale and even a little black. She seemed to be in great pain. Even his breathing had started to become unstable. Lin Yi couldn't help but be shocked again. An expert at the peak of the nascent soul realm couldn't even stabilize her breath in such a short time, which meant that a great change must have happened to her. But just now she just walked normally, and he didn't find any danger. Could it be that she had a relapse of some old disease? What's wrong with you? Lin Yi quickly helped Huiyuti sit up and let her lean on him so that at least her breath could be a little more stable. Huiyuti didn't answer. Her breathing was rapid and her eyes were lifeless. She probably couldn't even hear what Lin Yi was saying, let alone reply. Lin Yi frowned. He had no choice but to examine her body himself. However, when he lowered his head, he was shocked. Previously, it was difficult to notice it because the dress had covered it. It was only at this moment that she inadvertently moved. Only then did he realize that there was something hanging from her calf. At first glance, it looked like a small lizard, but it had 8 legs, and its head was triangular like a viper's. Its eyes were suffused with an alarming blue light. What is this? Lin Yi's heart skipped a beat. Hui Yuti's sudden reaction had to have something to do with this thing. The thing was small, but it gave off an intimidating aura that wasn't any weaker than the mannequin. In Lin Yi's opinion, it was even more than that. For a moment, Lin Yi didn't know what to do. At this time, Hui Yuti suddenly rolled her eyes, and her head drooped down powerlessly. This gave Lin Yi a big shock. This little girl wouldn't die just like that, right? He had spent so much time with Hui Yuti just for the Thunder Mystic Vine. Now, he hadn't even seen its shadow. If she was killed by a small lizard, how could he bear it? Lin Yi quickly checked Hui Yuti's breath. Although it was weak, it hadn't completely disappeared. Only then did he let out a sigh of relief. As long as she wasn't dead, it was fine. He was also considered a miracle doctor, so he had a good way of treating injuries. Since the source of the problem was this lizard-like monster, the first thing to do before treating Hui Yuti's injury was, of course, to kill this thing first. Lin Yi's eyes were filled with murderous intent, and he immediately punched out without saying anything. His fist looked ordinary, but he had used 50% of his strength. This strange thing was able to defeat Hui Yuti in such a short period of time, so it was not ordinary at all. He absolutely could not underestimate it in the slightest. After punching out, Lin Yi originally thought that this lizard-like monster would either be killed by him or turn to attack him. However, to his surprise, facing his attack, the lizard-like monster just dodged to the side indifferently. It still didn't have any intention of letting go of Hui Yuti's calf. At the same time it dodged, its evil blue eyes looked up at Lin Yi from below. It seemed to be mocking and provoking. A mere beast also dared to be so savage. Lin Yi was instantly enraged. He no longer took it lightly. Accompanied by a low dragon roar, a small 5-element murderous aura suddenly shot out from his palm and hit the lizard-like monster in an instant. With its chi sound, the lizard-like monster was hit head-on by the 5-element murderous aura. Only then did it finally let go of Hui Yuti's calf. After rolling on the ground a few times, it twitched wildly and died in the blink of an eye. Lin Yi looked at the corpse of the lizard-like monster on the ground. Such a small thing could actually force him to use his killer move. The ancient battlefield ruins were indeed full of danger. There were all kinds of strange threats everywhere. After dealing with the lizard-like monster, Lin Yi checked Hui Yuti's condition again. However, he found that at this moment, her breath had become increasingly weak. If this continued, she might really die. At this moment, Hui Yuti's calf, which had originally been as smooth and white as jade, had turned purplish-black under the illumination of the moonlight. In particular, the wound that had been bitten by the lizard monster was continuously oozing out a terrifying black liquid, and there were faint signs of rotting. Poison. Lin Yi's heart skipped a beat. Although he could roughly judge from the appearance of the lizard-like monster, at this moment he really saw that the poison was acting up. Moreover, it was acting up so violently. This was really troublesome. If it was just a simple injury, even if it involved the internal organs, it would not be a big deal in the hands of Lin Yi. After all, he had the universal true chi. However, it was hard to say if she was poisoned. Just the universal true chi alone was not enough. If it was not handled properly, Hui Yuti's leg would be completely crippled. She might even lose her life. Lin Yi may be a miracle doctor, but that was limited to the common world. He didn't know anything about the weird poisons on this island, and he'd been busy practicing for the past 2 years. He never had the time to do any systematic research, especially when it came to these weird spirit beasts. He'd never even heard of them before. So how was he supposed to treat them? Chapter 4676. Senior, do you know what this thing is? Helpless, Lin Yi had no choice but to seek help from the ghost, the former Azure Dragon. This guy should know everything about spirit beasts. Well, strictly speaking, this thing is not a spirit beast, but an insect subject. The ghost thing pondered for a moment. This is an insect. He paused as he looked at the carcass on the ground. No matter how he looked at it, it looked like a mutated venomous lizard. He didn't expect it to be an insect. That's right. If I remember correctly, its full name should be eight-legged tooth insect. Although its intelligence isn't very high, its body is highly toxic, and the toxicity is very strong. Even a profound ascending stage master can be easily taken down. The ghost explained. Even a profound ascending stage master can be taken down. He was shocked. In his impression, ordinary poisons had no effect on high-level cultivators. Many poisons could easily kill ordinary people, but the effect was greatly reduced for high-level cultivators. Especially at the nascent soul stage, it could be said to be no threat at all. He didn't expect the toxicity of this strange thing to be so strong. Yes, this thing is a rare poison. You can keep its corpse. Maybe it will come in handy in the future. It may be used for alchemy or forging. The ghost thing said, "Okay." He moved the body of the eight-legged tooth-claw worm into the space of the jade pendant. Then he looked at Huiyuti, whose breath was getting weaker and weaker. What about her? If we don't think of a countermeasure quickly, she will die. From the beginning until now, he'd spent so much effort following her for so long, and he hadn't even seen the shadow of the Thunder Xian vine. If Huiyuti really died in a place like this, then he'd really be screwed. What should we do? It's very simple. You just need to help her cure the poison. The ghost thing said indifferently. How do I cure this? He couldn't help but scratch his head. This is not difficult. The most primitive method will do. Use your mouth to suck it out. The ghost thing laughed. Huh? Use my mouth. He almost choked. He coughed for a while and said, "Cough. Wouldn't I be dead then? Senior, didn't you just say that this poison can even easily kill a profound ascending stage master? Others will die, but you won't," the ghostly thing said in a confident tone. Why? He was surprised. Don't think that I don't know that you're immune to all poisons. Didn't that old Lin make it for you? Your physique has been tempered since you were young. Now that you have become stronger, it will only become more stable. No matter how strong the poison is, it will be useless on your body, said the ghostly thing. You even know this? He was even more astonished. The ghost had been with him for quite some time now, but that was only a short time before he came to Sky Class Island. If he hadn't mentioned it before, there shouldn't be any reason for him to know about it, especially since the matter of his immunity to poison had been exposed to Old Man Lin. Oh, when I had nothing to do, I casually looked through your past and your divine knowledge, see. So, I still have some impression of this kind of thing. The ghostly thing curled its lips indifferently. What? You peeped at my memory? He was shocked. He had never thought that there would be such a thing before. If it could casually look through his own memory, then wouldn't there be no secrets in front of this ghostly thing? This feeling of being seen was too scary, right? Although this ghostly thing was not an outsider. At least at this stage, and it were bound together. But even so, this feeling of having all his secrets seen by someone else, it really made people shudder just thinking about it. Hey, I have nothing to do anyway, so I use it to kill time and relieve boredom. Don't worry, I'm not interested in your little secrets. The ghostly thing laughed. Can I ask, Senior, where did you learn this shameless behavior from? Why do I always meet such bad people? He was suddenly speechless. He didn't feel it when he was not familiar with it. But now that he was familiar with it, he suddenly realized that this ghostly thing was also a playful old man. He couldn't help but think of the old man. Don't mutter, kid. Hurry up and treat her poison. It's already spread. If you don't hurry up, this girl will die for sure. The ghostly thing interrupted with a strange laugh. All right, seeing that the purplish-black part on Huiyuti's calf was getting bigger and bigger, he didn't dare to think about those useless things anymore. After laying Huiyuti flat on the ground, he immediately clenched his teeth and lay down. At this moment, Huiyuti's wound had already melted, and black liquid was constantly flowing out. When Lenny got closer, he almost vomited on the spot. He used the last of his willpower to resist the nausea and put his mouth on it. While treating Huiyuti's poison, he secretly felt helpless. He thought to himself that when this girl recovered, he had to renegotiate with her about splitting the profits. Otherwise, she would have sucked the poison for nothing. Lying on Hui Yuti's calf, he didn't feel the slightest bit enchanting at this moment. Although he had a super strong physique that was immune to poison, the poison of the 8-legged tooth crackworm was really terrifying. Every time he sucked from Hui Yuti's wound, there would suddenly be a burning pain on his mouth. After a while, the poison in Hui Yuti's body finally subsided. The originally purplish-black calf gradually recovered a trace of color, and the somewhat weak breath also began to stabilize. However, this made Linny suffer. Although the poison had no effect on him, the burning pain was real. Not to mention anything else, his mouth was almost numb now. Although his mouth was numb, Linny didn't dare to relax at all. Although Hui Yuti's condition was showing signs of improvement, the poison of the 8-legged tooth crackworm could easily kill a profound ascending stage master. Even a little bit of it could take Hui Yuti's life. What's more, although Linny was immune to poison, he didn't dare to take it lightly. What if the poison was too overbearing and he was accidentally poisoned? He was lying next to Hui Yuti's leg to treat her poison. At this moment, two sneaky figures suddenly appeared not far away. They were two men. Although they didn't wear a uniform, there was a badge with a double cloud spreading wings pattern on their neckline. This kind of badge was also worn by Renjong Yuan and Yishaotian. It was the symbol of Soaring Cloud Academy. Chapter 46-77. Because of their low strength, these two people were probably at the bottom of all the participants of the West Island trial. They were disciples of the East Continent's Soaring Cloud Academy, and they could follow the envoy to the West Island, but their strength was actually at the bottom of all the participants. This was really a rare thing. The sun was setting, and it was getting dark at this time. The two people's strength was low, so no matter what kind of ferocious creatures or other trial takers they encountered, it could be a fatal threat to them. So it was not strange that the two of them walked so stealthily. Every step they took was very careful. The two of them moved forward bit by bit, while muttering and complaining to each other. Alas, I don't know what Brother Ren and Brother E are thinking. They specially brought us 2 followers to the West Island, but now they leave us behind at such a critical time and let us act alone. It's such a dangerous place. If we're not careful, we'll be killed. Hey, Sun Baolu, are you stupid? This trial is a rare opportunity for Brother Ren and Brother E to be alone with beautiful women. How could they take us with them and ruin the fun? One of the men wearing a bamboo hat curled his lips and said, "They don't have to leave us behind on purpose. At worst, they can follow them a little further. We won't disturb their good time, and we can help them carry things." Didn't they do the same when they went out to play before? Sun Baolu shook his head helplessly, then lowered his voice and said, "According to my speculation, in fact, Brother Ren and Brother, he didn't leave us behind for this thing at all, but to find some very rare treasures of heaven and earth. What do you think, Li Yuzhou?" "Hiss, now that you mention it, I really remember. Before we came to the West Island, when Brother E and Sister Yao talked, I heard a few words. It seemed that they were really looking for some treasures of heaven and earth. They had prepared for it for a long time in advance. They just kept it a secret from us." Li Yuzhou couldn't help but feel a little resentful when he said this. I already guessed this. This is the fate of us followers. Good things never happen to us, but bad things happen to us every time. Hey, Sun Baolu laughed at himself. This was something that couldn't be helped. Who asked these people to have no background? In order to establish a foothold in the Eastern Continent College, which was a dangerous place like the Dragon Pool and the Tiger Cave, one must have either strong strength or a deep background. Otherwise, they would be swallowed whole. People like them could only rely on young masters like Renjong Yuan and Yishaotian. There was no other way out. The two of them grumbled softly as they carefully explored forward. Suddenly, Li Yuzhou stopped in his tracks. His eyes were looking straight ahead, and his mouth was agape for a long time. "What are you doing? Was he possessed by a ghost?" Seeing this, Sun Baolu couldn't help but feel a little nervous. He thought they were being targeted by some unknown monster. With their strength in the peak of Gold Core realm, once such a situation occurred, the outcome would be really terrible. No, Look, look over there. Li Yuzhou stammered. He couldn't utter a complete sentence for a long time, as if he was having a convulsion. He pointed ahead in a daze. Li Yuzhou looked in the direction of his finger. With just a glance, he was stunned and couldn't come back to his senses for a long time. After a long time, he gasped in disbelief and whispered, "Oh my God. The world is really big and full of strange things. In this kind of place, we can actually meet someone who is having sex in the wild. My God, this woman's body looks so fucking hot. It's more than that. Don't you think this woman looks familiar?" Li Yuzhou continued to stare straight ahead and said, "Hiss, now that you mention it, it's true. Oh my God, isn't this Hui Yudi, one of the two beauties in the morning? Why isn't she with Brother Rin? Instead, she's having sex with another man here. I didn't know she was so wild before." Sun Baolu was shocked. More than wild, she's almost unrestrained. I used to think that this girl was an iceberg snow lotus, always with a pure and holy look. I didn't expect that she would become so coquettish when she came to West Island. She actually let that man lie under her skirt and suck. My eyes are so dazzling. Li Yuzhou rubbed his hands with his eyes shining. This kind of scene was so exciting that any man couldn't hold it. TSK, TSK. I also want to go and lick her, even in my dreams. Sun Baolu couldn't help but swallow his saliva. Hey, do you think I don't want to? Li Yuzhou rolled his eyes at him and said with pity, "All the good cabbages are taken by pigs. It's a pity that no matter how wild this little hussy is, she is doomed to have no share in it. If you dare to have this wicked idea, aren't you afraid that Brotherin will kill you? I'm just saying, I don't have the guts." Sun Baolu shrank his neck and swallowed a few mouthfuls of saliva greedily before saying, "But this Hua Shiwilian is actually having sex with another man here. Isn't our brother Rin wearing a big green hat on his head? Should we go and take care of it?" Hearing this, Li Yuzhou couldn't help but be a little tempted. At this time, if he went and took care of it, wouldn't it be a good opportunity to take advantage of them? Even if he couldn't touch them, at least he could see them more clearly. After all, they were the two beauties in the morning, goddesses in the eyes of ordinary disciples like them. However, Li Yuzhou immediately suppressed this tempting idea. He patted Sun Baolu's head angrily and said, "Do you dare to go? That guy's a master of the nascent soul stage." At this time, in order to treat Hui Yudi's poison, Lin, he had to circulate his true qi all the time to prevent the poison from invading his body. Although his body was immune to poison, there was always a higher mountain. What if the poison of this eight-legged tooth insect was more violent than imagined? There was no chance for this kind of thing to happen again. Once something went wrong, he would definitely die. Therefore, at this moment, the aura of master at the peak of the early stage of the nascent soul stage was fully revealed. Even though there was a distance between them, Li Yuzhou and Sun Baolu could see it clearly. The two of them were only in the gold core stage. At this time, of course, they didn't dare to jump out and ruin the good thing. Put yourself in their shoes and think about it. If they were having sex in the wild and were disrupted, they would definitely kill in anger. This man was a master at the peak of the early stage of the nascent soul stage. The two of them together were not his opponent, not to mention Hui Yudi, a master at the peak of the nascent soul stage. They didn't dare to move. What we do? Are we just going to sit here and watch? Sun Baolu frowned unwillingly. Since he couldn't take advantage of it, he could only enjoy it from a distance. Chapter 4678. Ugh, then there's nothing to say. Let's run quickly. Sun Baolu shrank his neck. Compared to admiring Hua Shiwilian's coquettish look, his own life was more important. Don't worry. Leave some evidence before we run. Later, we will let Brother Rin enjoy it. Li Yuzhou said as he took out a digital camera from his backpack. In order to curry favor with Hui Yudi, Ren Zhongyuan had spent a lot of money to buy it from the Central Chamber of Commerce. Unfortunately, Hui Yudi didn't even look at it before throwing it back. So after going around in circles, it still ended up in the hands of his follower. No matter where Ren Zhongyuan went, his follower had to carry it for him. This time was no exception. Click, click. Li Yuzhou took 2 pictures in a row in front of him. Then he turned around and ran without saying anything. Even if the other party was busy having sex in the wild before and didn't find him, he would definitely be discovered this time. If he didn't run, he would be a fool. Sun Balu looked at it reluctantly. Then he followed Li Yuzhou and fled in a hurry, for fear that the other party would recover. They didn't know that the two of them had been noticed by Lin Yi from the beginning. Although the distance was not close, and he couldn't hear what the two of them were talking about, Lin Yi had received training since childhood. Always observing the environment was the introductory course of an assassin. Even without divine sense, he could clearly detect the two of them. However, he didn't dare to further lock with divine sense at this time. After detecting the two of them, he felt that a light flashed, and then the two of them ran away. It wasn't that Lin Yi didn't want to get up and catch these two sneaky guys. The problem was that he was busy treating Hui Yuti's poison. He must be fully focused at all times. He didn't even dare to release his divine sense. He was afraid that he would be disturbed if he was distracted. How could he stop halfway? These two weren't important to Lin Yi, so it didn't matter if they ran. As long as they didn't do anything bad, the urgent matter at hand was to suck out all the poison in Hui Yuti's body as soon as possible. Otherwise, not only this chick would suffer, even the Thunder Schwanning would definitely have no chance. After another half an hour, Lin Yi's whole mouth was completely numbed by the venom. Hui Yuti's calf regained some color. It wasn't as ghastly as before. Hui Yuti moaned as she opened her eyes. This was a normal reaction after most of the toxins in her body had been sucked out by Lin Yi. However, she immediately screamed when she opened her eyes. Anyone who woke up and saw a man burying his head under her skirt would definitely have the same reaction. Hui Yuti was both angry and embarrassed. She screamed and lifted her leg to kick Lin Yi. However, the result made her even more frightened. She suddenly found that she couldn't move her legs. At this moment, although Lin Yi had helped her suck out most of the poison, there was still some left. Moreover, the leg was the most important part of the bite. Even with Lin Yi's strong physique that was immune to poison, just helping her suck out the poison made his mouth numb. If she could lift her leg and kick him at this time, then she would really be seeing a ghost. You big pervert. What have you done to me? Why did you fix my body in place and not let me move? Hui Yuti was so embarrassed and angry that tears came out. She had a pure body and had never even held a man's hand before. How could she endure such a sudden and huge stimulation? At this moment, she wanted nothing more than to perish together with this shameless beast, Lin Yi. Huh? What nonsense are you talking about? Lin Yi was stunned when he heard this. He then raised his head with a strange expression. The worst thing was that the corner of his mouth hadn't been wiped clean, and there was saliva that could easily make one's imagination run wild. What made people even more speechless was that his mouth was a little numb. At this moment, he spoke in a muffled voice. People would think that he had swallowed something in his mouth. Hui Yuti almost fainted when she saw this. At this moment, not only her legs, but her entire lower body was basically numb. Moreover, Lin Yi just happened to be lying under her skirt. She thought that Lin Yi had been sucking on her private parts. Immediately, she was shocked and angry. She scolded, "You shameless. You bastard. Fuck." Lin Yi finally understood the misunderstanding and immediately stood up. He coldly stared at Hui Yuti and said, "Little girl, what do you want? I risked my life to help you suck out that strange worm's fatal poison, and you still call me a shameless bastard? Fine. Since it's like this, you can slowly lie here. I won't accompany you anymore. Bye-bye." The relationship between Lin Yi and this little girl couldn't be said to be good. This time, he had risked his life to treat her poison, which was already extremely benevolent. He didn't expect that the other party didn't even know a fart and actually scolded him. Really, a good person can't be a good person. A dog that bites Lu Dongbin doesn't recognize a good person's kindness. Seeing that after Lin Yi finished speaking, he patted his butt and left without hesitation. Hui Yuti suddenly remembered that she seemed to have been bitten by something. Then, very quickly, her whole body went numb and she fainted. So it really wasn't Lin Yi's doing? Did I misunderstand him? Thinking of this, Hui Yuti subconsciously moved. She discovered that other than the leg that wanted to kick Lin Yi, Although the other parts of her body were a little numb, they weren't completely immobile. Especially the upper half of her body that was less affected by the poison. She could basically move freely. Huyuti was a little dumbfounded. She wasn't a one-track-minded idiot. The facts were in front of her, and it could be said that it was obvious. Just now, the poison of the strange worm could knock her down in the blink of an eye. With such a strong poison, if no one detoxified it for her, the consequences would be obvious. But now, her body was much better. This meant that Lin Yi was indeed detoxifying her just now. It was just that because the poison was in a special place, this posture was more likely to be misunderstood. Wait, you wait. Huyuti didn't dare to hesitate anymore. She hurriedly screamed and wanted to get up to chase after Lin Yi. Not only did she wrongly blame a good person, but if Lin Yi really abandoned her in a fit of anger, with her current state, she couldn't even stand up. Being left here alone was simply impossible to call for help. At that time, if anything happened, the consequences would be unimaginable. What else do you want? Lin Yi turned around and glanced at her. He said unhappily, "Isn't it exactly what you want for a shameless bastard like me to stay away from you? Lest I do something to you that can't see the light of day again. It's good to break up like this. Don't worry, I also save trouble. It's the best of both worlds. Don't go." Huyuti's pretty face blushed. If it wasn't for the veil covering her face, it could be seen that her face was so red that it was about to drip blood. She weakly muttered, "Sorry, I wrongly blamed you." Chapter 46-79. Lin Yi turned around and walked back to Huyuti's side. He didn't really want to leave. After all, leaving a weak girl who couldn't move in this dangerous wilderness was something he couldn't do. "Thank you." Huyuti thanked him softly with a red face. At the same time, she was a little surprised. She thought that Lin Yi would really leave after suffering such injustice. She didn't expect him to be so easy to talk to. She really didn't see it before. She didn't know why, but after this misunderstanding, Huyuti felt that Lin Yi had become a lot more reliable. At the very least, it was a completely different image compared to the one she had when she was trying to extort money from him. Unexpectedly, just as her impression of him improved, Lin Yi's next words caused the trust that she had built up with so much difficulty to collapse by a lot. "You're welcome, but we have to have a good talk." "Talk about what?" Huyuti had just woken up. Her head was still a little swollen, and she couldn't react for a moment. "Of course, it's to have a good talk about repayment. You can't be so naive to think that I would save you for nothing, right? In any case, you're a genius disciple from Morning Pride Academy. You shouldn't be so ignorant of the ways of the world, right?" Lin Yi looked at Huyuti with a sneaky smile. "All you want?" Huyuti saw Lin Yi's expression and immediately became nervous again. It was just that before, it was pure shock and anger, but now, she couldn't help but have some shyness of a young girl. She was originally beautiful and moving, but now, she became even more covetous. There's a kind of temptation that could be plucked by anyone. Lin Yi's eyes couldn't help but light up. "This time, I almost lost my life when I helped you suck out the poison. I believe that you understand the dangers involved the most. Of course, the repayment is not lacking." Lin Yi paused. Looking at Huyuti's little heart thumped wildly, then said, "So, when the time comes, we have to change the way we split the Thunder Xian Vine. You get 20, and I get 80. You don't have any objections, right?" You. Huyuti was dumbfounded. The nervousness and shyness in her heart disappeared in an instant. She thought that Lin Yi had seen something he shouldn't have seen under her skirt and wanted to use this opportunity to make some unreasonable demands. After all, it was common for someone to repay a life-saving debt with their body. Huyuti had always been very confident in her looks, and it was because of this that she had to cover her face. Otherwise, men would chase after her like flies that couldn't be driven away, and there would be too many troubles. Under such circumstances, she naturally thought that Lin Yi would also make such a request, but she never expected that. This guy had been beating around the bush for half a day just to say this. Huyuti was both angry and amused at the same time. Looking at the serious Lin Yi, She was speechless for a long time. She really didn't know how to describe this feeling. If she was someone from the secular world, she might say, "I've even taken off my pants, and you're showing me this? What about me? This is already a very small return. Okay? Think about it. I saved your life. Is there a problem with that?" Lin Yi said with a matter-of-fact expression. Hui Yuti didn't know why, but she was suddenly in a good mood, and the corners of her mouth curled up as she said, "No, we agreed on 370. This is this. Then didn't I let you suck it for nothing?" Lin Yi glanced at her. "Anyway, I'm done. It's useless for you to go back on your word. 370 is 370. As for you detoxifying me, I can think of another way to repay you," Hui Yuti said with a proud smile. She didn't feel this way before, but now she felt that bickering with Lin Yi wasn't a bad thing. "Hee, are you burning the bridge after crossing the river?" Lin Yi couldn't help but laugh, but his face still had a victorious expression. He said with a smile, "It's a pity that you're burning the bridge a little too early. You haven't even completely crossed the river. Aren't you digging your own grave by burning the bridge now?" "What do you mean?" Hui Yuti looked at Lin Yi's expression and couldn't help but twitch. "It's very simple. Aren't you still so numb that you can't move? This means that the poison hasn't been completely sucked out. What I helped you just now was only some of the poison left on the surface. However, during this period of time, some of the poison has already been absorbed by you. It is already integrated into your body and is difficult to remove. So, I estimate that in a few more hours, the poison will enter your vitals," Lin Yi said with a faint smile. Hui Yuti was no longer in a good mood. She was instantly frightened by Lin Yi and was at a loss of what to do. She said with a face full of fear, "Is this true or false? You're not lying to me. Whether it's true or false, won't you know after feeling it yourself? You should know better than me about this kind of thing. Take a look at how far the poison has developed in your body. If the poison has really been completely removed, why is your leg still unable to move?" Lin Yi said indifferently. Hui Yuti didn't dare to be negligent. She carefully felt it according to Lin Yi's words, and her heart sank. It was just as Lin Yi said. The poison that hadn't been sucked out had already integrated into her body through her blood. If it continued to develop, even the gods wouldn't be able to save her. "How is it? Have you thought it through?" Lin Yi crossed his arms and stood calmly at the side as he looked at her. "That Kai Zi was right. You really are a eunuch." Hui Yuti couldn't help but be a little angry. She pitifully blinked her eyes and pouted. "I've already begged you so much, but you still want to take advantage of me. And it's this kind of advantage. What? Then do you want me not to be a eunuch and take advantage of you in other ways? Or do you want me to just—" Lin Yi heard this and couldn't help but smile playfully. Hui Yuti was suddenly speechless. Only then did she realize the ambiguity in her words. Her pretty face blushed again. This time, even her veil was slightly reflected. She quickly buried her head in her chest and said in a muffled voice, Okay. 280 is 280. Quickly help me detoxify. That's more like it. It may be a little painful next. You have to bear with it." Lin Yi smiled and immediately knelt on the ground again. He put his mouth on the other party's wound. His mouth was originally numb, but now that he had rested for a while, it had completely recovered. "Oomph." Hui Yuti let out a low moan as she felt Lin Yi sucking on her lips. She blushed at her own reaction. Her legs were still numb, but she could more or less feel them now because of the large amount of toxins that had been expelled from her body. Chapter 4680. She didn't know what Lin Yi's reaction was, but Hui Yuti was already blushing. She let a man lie under her skirt and suck on her wound, and she couldn't help but let out such an ambiguous moan. What was going on? As a girl with a pure heart, Hui Yuti was obviously very sensitive to this aspect of shame. After letting out a subconscious moan, she immediately gritted her teeth and held it in. She couldn't let out a second moan even if she died. Otherwise, how could she face Lin Yi in the future? Just thinking about this kind of thing was embarrassing. However, after a short while, Hui Yuti's body suddenly trembled slightly, and she couldn't help but let out another moan. In fact, this couldn't be blamed on her. If Lin Yi was simply sucking on her wound, she could actually barely endure it. However, at this moment, there was suddenly a warm, vital energy in her body. It flowed through her meridians, and every time it flowed, it would bring something from her body that shouldn't be there. It was the poison that the eight-legged tooth claw worm had fused into her body. Not only was this feeling not painful at all, but it was also very warm and comfortable. In addition, as the poison decreased, the stimulation from Lin Yi's sucking on her wound became stronger. Huiyuti couldn't help but feel like she was floating. When she came back to her senses, she felt that something was wrong with her whole body. What's wrong with me? Huiyuti said in a daze as she resisted the comfortable and stimulating feeling that constantly attacked her scalp. However, this pitiful willpower was quickly shattered by the next wave of feeling. What was this girl thinking? Listening to Huiyuti's faint moans, Lin Yi couldn't help but be a little speechless. He had painstakingly sucked out the poison for her, and at the same time, he had to control the all-purpose vital energy to swim in her body. He thought this process would be more painful, but he didn't expect her to sound like she was enjoying it. Although he was speechless, Lin Yi couldn't stop and say anything at this time. As long as Huiyuti resisted and didn't move, he would let her do whatever she wanted. However, Lin Yi soon felt that he had made a mistake because he found that Huiyuti's moans didn't stop. On the contrary, it showed signs of becoming more and more frequent and intense. It was simply out of control. Listening to this seductive voice, even Lin Yi couldn't help but feel a little restless in his heart. He couldn't help but curse in his heart. Although this chick was a little straightforward when they first met, most of the time she still had the temperament of an iceberg snow lotus. He didn't expect her to be so open at this time. Little did he know that it was because of the poison. Huiyuti couldn't control her feelings at all. As a master of the peak yuanying stage, the powerful restraint was not useful at this moment. It was completely the instinctive reaction of the body. However, even though she couldn't control herself, Huiyuti's mind was still very clear. She could clearly see all of her reactions. She was so embarrassed that if there was a crack on the ground, she would have already crawled into it. Call me whatever you want. After I recover my ability to move, just don't kick me. Lin Yi muttered in his heart. He immediately concentrated on using his all-purpose true qi to eradicate the last bit of poison. Unexpectedly, just as he was about to succeed, Huiyuti suddenly cried out again. A warm current seemed to be uncontrollable. Lin Yi's position was simply unbiased, and he just happened to be drenched. This scene came too suddenly. Lin Yi was completely caught off guard, and his whole body was immediately stunned. He faintly felt that it was somewhat familiar. After thinking for a long time, he finally remembered. It was the same situation when he was treating the young Miss Poison in the past. He was simply drenched to death. Lin Yi stared blankly for a long time and didn't move. After a long time, he lowered his head with a speechless expression. He eliminated the last bit of poison in the other party's body and silently stood up. At this moment, Huiyuti's whole body was already limp. Even though she knew that she had regained consciousness, she still curled up on the ground and didn't dare to move. She had an ashamed look on her face. Needless to say, this chick looked even more beautiful at this moment. Lin Yi suddenly shook his head speechlessly. He thought to himself, the one who was drenched just now was me. I haven't said anything yet, and you're still shy. However, to be honest, Lin Yi didn't have much resistance or dissatisfaction with this matter. He didn't have much resistance in his heart either. Anyway, he didn't smell any strange odor, and after all, she was a rare beauty. In his opinion, this matter was a loss that he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. But in the eyes of other men, it might be a dream, so he just endured it. The two of them were silent for a long time. Lin Yi helplessly waited at the side, but Huiyuti buried her head like an ostrich and didn't move. It was almost midnight. How long was this chick going to be shy? However, at this time, if it was any other girl, they would be ashamed. Huiyuti's reaction was normal. Lin Yi thought about it and had to take the lead to break the silence. He comforted her. In fact, you don't have to be embarrassed. It's a natural reaction of the human body. I just gathered the poison absorbed from your body through the meridians and then used this method to expel it from your body. So it's expected. There's nothing to be shy about." These words were simply nonsense. It was just to find a justifiable excuse for Huiyuti. In fact, it was not the case at all. The little bit of poison that her body had absorbed had already been crushed in a powder by Lin Yi's 5 elements murderous aura. Compared to the original all-purpose qi, the 5 elements murderous aura had a more obvious healing effect. This was a new discovery that Lin Yi had just made during the process of curing the poison. In the past, except for people like Lin Yi who had the 5 elements physique, the 5 elements murderous aura was an extremely fatal existence for any cultivator. It was so fierce and overbearing that no one could withstand it. However, in the process of curing the poison, Lin Yi suddenly discovered that the 5 elements murderous aura's healing effect was far stronger than the all-purpose qi. More importantly, it also had the characteristics of the all-purpose qi. As long as he controlled it well, it would not cause any harm to the opponent. In the end, it could be absorbed by the opponent. Simply put, it was simply an upgraded version of the all-purpose qi. It was extremely overbearing when used to attack, and it was always successful when used to heal. This was the best description for the 5 elements murderous aura. This sudden and unexpected joy made Lin Yi rejoice. Being able to find the giant electric eel in the deep sea was simply a blessing that couldn't be cultivated for several lifetimes. The 5 elements murderous aura itself was an endless, huge treasure. Lin Yi shrugged his shoulders at Huiyuti, who was still lying on the ground. He had already paved the stairs for her. If she still didn't get up, then he really didn't know what to do. Chapter 4681. In any case, he couldn't just lie down like this. Lin Yi didn't want to waste time on this kind of thing. Looking at Huiyuti's limp appearance, to be honest, Lin Yi was also quite puzzled. He could understand the first few snorts, but why did it become like this in the end? Only God knew. He couldn't understand it himself. A voice popped up in Lin Yi's mind, just as he was cursing Lin Yi. "You've probably made her high." Puff. Cough, cough, cough. When he was immersed in thinking, this suddenly happened. Lin Yi was almost scared crazy. He choked a few times before he could barely hold it in. He complained speechlessly. "Senior Ghost, you scare me to death." "How am I scared you? Didn't you say that only God knows? That's why I helped you analyze it." The ghost laughed strangely. There was even a hint of schadenfreude in its tone. Okay, but Senior, can you pay attention next time? Don't make me crazy. It's not good for you." Lin Yi shook his head helplessly. He paused and added, "Senior, your English is quite good. If I didn't know you were the former Azure Dragon, I would definitely fight with anyone who dared to say that you were a native of the Heavenly Stage Island. Hee, I can even learn the ancient language of you humans without a teacher, let alone this kind of bird language. Do you believe it?" The ghost said in a disapproving tone. Lin Yi was speechless again. The existence of this ghost was really unreasonable. In addition to the most instinctive fighting and killing, it even had such a terrible talent for this kind of thing. How could the students in the secular world endure this? Just as Lin Yi was communicating with the ghost, Huiyuti seemed to understand Lin Yi's words just now. She reacted a little slowly. She blushed and whispered like a mosquito. "Really? You're not lying to me?" The reason why she was so shy was that she had been wondering whether she would be a fucking woman. No matter how innocent Huiyuti was, she was still a nascent soul great circle expert. Moreover, she wasn't young at all. Although no one would mention this to her, she could still read books. Within the scripture depository of a Morning Pride Academy, there were all sorts of books, some of which were related to this aspect. There were also some very specialized books, specifically researching on how to dual cultivate with a man. After all, it was a female academy. There were bound to be some disciples who chose this path. It was also under such an atmosphere that Huiyuti had once flipped through such books out of curiosity. Thus, she knew that some women would have such a reaction at that time. However, not all women would be like this. Only a small portion of them would be like this. She had always thought that she was very pure, so how could she be like this? If that was all, it would have been fine, but the problem was that she actually sprayed Lin all over Lin when he was treating her. How could he still have the face to go out and meet people, especially in front of Lin? No, what's in it for me to lie to you? Can you give me 10% more? Lin, he couldn't help but laugh in his heart. However, on the surface, he acted serious. Otherwise, he couldn't guarantee that this girl wouldn't be embarrassed to death. Right now, the most important thing was to hurry up and find the Thunder Xianvine. He didn't have so much time to waste. After hearing Lin Yi's answer, Huiyuti immediately heaved a sigh of relief. Although she was still a little shy, she wasn't as ashamed as she was before. Since this was a normal detoxification process, it meant that it wasn't her problem. It meant that she wasn't the kind of woman described in the books. That was enough. Lin Yi's expression at this moment had a bit of a smile that wasn't a smile. In fact, it was only because he was communicating with the ghost through his divine sense. However, in Huiyuti's eyes, it naturally had a different meaning. This girl was so shy that she couldn't even lift her head. After finally finding a way out, she immediately blushed. It's all because of you. I'll deduct 10% from you. Let's make it 30-70. Huiyuti mustered up her courage to look at Lin Yi and said angrily. This time, Lin Yi was completely speechless. What was wrong with this woman? He risked being buried with her to save her life, but in the end, she ate this little benefit back. Wasn't she turning hostile a little too fast? It seemed that the old saying was right. Only women and vile people were difficult to raise. What? Do you have an opinion? Huiyuti saw Lin Yi's strange expression and her pretty face blushed. She snorted and said, "Let me tell you, if I tell others about today's matter, for the sake of my reputation, my master will definitely kill you." Huh. Lin Yi suddenly widened his eyes. He was just wondering why this girl suddenly became a little unruly. In the end, when he suddenly heard this sentence, he almost choked to death. This kind of thing could actually be used to threaten him. What kind of strange thinking was this? If she went out now, didn't she know that the one who would be the most humiliated would be herself? Or was it really, as she said, that she had always been cultivating, and her mental age was far younger than ordinary people, so she didn't understand the basic ways of the world? Seeing that Lin Yi was stunned by her words, Huiyuti's mouth curled up proudly. She finally got rid of the embarrassment from before. Her eyes curved into two delightful arcs, and she said with a proud smile, "Now you have nothing to say, right? Then it's decided happily." Huiyuti was instantly in a good mood. These were the words that Lin Yi had used to mock her. Now, she could finally use them on Lin Yi. Giving him a taste of his own medicine, this kind of feeling was great. There's no use in going out. Who knows, it might even have the opposite effect. Lin Yi faintly smiled disapprovingly. What do you mean? Huiyuti looked at Lin Yi suspiciously. You set yourself. Your master and the deputy island master of Shanghai Tianhua are good friends. Since I'm his personal disciple, who knows, after your master hears about this, he might simply push the boat with the current and directly marry you to me as a cultivation companion. At that time, there's no medicine for regret. Lin Yi slightly raised his eyebrows and smiled. In your dreams. Huiyuti's pretty face blushed slightly as she lightly spat. Her cheeks were once again filled with fiery clouds. The sensitive word cultivation companion caused her body to subconsciously go limp, and she instinctively recalled the embarrassing scene just now. Chapter 4682. You really know how to take advantage of the situation. If I give you a ladder, you can go to the sky, right? My master and deputy island master Shangwan are good friends. That's true, but your deputy island master Shangwan's personal disciple. Huiyuti had a look of disbelief on her face, but when she said this, she suddenly froze. Not to mention anything else. Lin Yi's previous intimate performance with Shanghai Laner was real, and although his realm was only at the peak of the early stage of nascent soul, it could be seen from the previous fight with the humanoid vine that his real strength was by no means so simple. At least, he was an existence that could fight against enemies of a higher level. In addition, He just treated her with a magical method. Each and every one of these things was not something that an ordinary disciple of the North Island could have. As the saying goes, a great teacher produces a great disciple. A person like Lin Yi, no matter how one looked at it, could not be taught by an ordinary cultivator. The person who could be his master must be an unfathomable big shot, and the person in the North Island who met this condition seemed to be Shanghai Tianhua. You can't really be? Hui Yuti couldn't help but change her expression, unable to hide her surprise, and asked. Almost. Lin Yi smiled indifferently. He did not intend to hide this kind of thing, nor did he intend to deceive Hui Yuti. Although there was no official master-disciple relationship, in fact, everyone in the 3 pavilions of the North Island, from top to bottom, had long regarded him as the personal disciple of Shanghai Tianhua. Even Shanghai Tianhua himself had a similar attitude. Otherwise, he would not pay so much attention to Lin Yi and would not take the initiative to try to help Lin Yi. If Lin Yi announced to the public that he was his personal disciple, his attitude must be tacit and maybe even fake it for real. Is this a prophecy of mine? Hui Yuti suddenly didn't know what to say. She had said this before to deal with Renjong Yuan and the others, but she did not expect it to be true. It was so strange. This word is not used to describe a good thing, right? Don't bully me because I'm uneducated. In any case, I went to university properly. Lin Yi corrected him with a straight face. These words were a little shameless. It was true that he was cultured, but that was all learned before he debuted. As for going to school, it was simply a pretense. It was pure nonsense. University? Oh, okay. Hui Yuti stared blankly for a moment, her eyes sizing up Lin Yi again, as if she wanted to see through all of his secrets. After a moment, her eyes suddenly lit up and she said, That's right. Since you and Shangwan Laner are so close, then she must be a good match that Deputy Island Master Shangwan has designated for you. Say, if she finds out that you've done something with other girls outside, will Shangwan Laner kill you out of anger? When she said this, Hui Yuti's tone was full of schadenfreude, as if she really felt that she had grasped hold of Lin Yi's weakness. After all, letting a direct disciple marry a descendant of a relative would make the relationship between the 2 parties closer and more reliable. This kind of thing could be seen everywhere on the Heaven Stage Island. Shangwan Laner was the pearl of Shangwan Tianhua. If she wanted to get married, the other party would either be a nephew of some super big shot or a direct disciple of Shangwan Tianhua. There was no third choice. And this Lin, although he was quite irritating at times, it was undeniable that this person was extremely outstanding in all aspects. However, it was undeniable that this person was extremely outstanding in all aspects. He was indeed a rare, 1-in-a-million match. The pavilion closest to the water enjoys moonlight first. Shangwan Tianhua would definitely not let him marry another woman. No way. Why would you want to kill me? Lin, he didn't know what was going on. Why not? Absolutely. This is the most basic common sense. Which woman is willing to let her husband be with another woman? Not to mention Shangwan Laner, the little princess of the North Island. Hui Yuti said with a face of certainty. Hee. Then do you know why I specifically came to participate in this low-level broken trial? Lin Yi smiled at Hui Yuti's determined gaze. Low-level? Broken trial? Hui Yuti was a little stunned. The West Island trial was ranked among the top 5 Heaven Stage islands, and the strength of this trial was generally at the nascent soul stage. Before, the dummy vine had already made them, the masters of the nascent soul stage, extremely embarrassed, and this was still a low-level broken trial? Of course, I can kill all the people here at will. Do I have nothing better to do? Why would I come to such a place to waste time? Although Lin Yi's tone was a little joking, there was no exaggeration in his words at all. This West Island trial was really not difficult for him. With Lin Yi's strength, the most suitable and valuable trial for him should at least be a dangerous place open to the masters of the profound ascending stage. There was no pressure at all now. It was simply whimsical to want to have a big harvest. If he could successfully get the Thunder Xian vine this time, he would be satisfied. As for breaking through in strength, he didn't even think about it. Hui Yuti couldn't help but roll her eyes at Lin Yi when she heard this. This tone was really big, and it sounded like a joke, but through all the previous things, she faintly felt that there was a little possibility. This guy was really unfathomable. She couldn't help but ask, "Then what are you doing here?" Because of Shangwan Laner, she said she didn't want her best friend to marry others, so I can only reluctantly do it. Lin, he shrugged with a smile. Best friend? Who is her best friend? Huayuti didn't respond for a while, and then suddenly remembered. She patted her head and said, Ning Shufa? For most male cultivators, the main purpose of this West Island trial was not the treasures of heaven and earth, but to compete for the princess of West Island. However, she was a girl, so she didn't take this matter to heart from beginning to end. Until now, she suddenly remembered there was such a thing. Yes, who else could it be? Lin Yi smiled. Damn. Huayuti's eyes became more and more strange. She looked up and down at Lin Yi again, which almost made Lin Yi mad. Then she said faintly, Isn't it said that only those very powerful people can have 3 wives and 4 concubines? What's more, Ning Shufa is the princess of West Island. Even if a man marries her, she must be the master. Can he marry other women? Won't the people of West Island go crazy? Am I not powerful? Lin Yi replied half-jokingly. As for the second question, he directly ignored it. Although this was indeed a very tricky problem, as long as he was strong enough, everything could be solved. Chapter 4683. Not the so-called people of West Island. Since Shanghai Tianhua could see Lin Yi's potential, so could Ning Shangling. As long as she knew that Lin Yi could become the reliance of the whole West Island one day, then nothing would be a problem. I really don't know where your confidence comes from. I don't want to talk to you anymore. I won't deduct your share, okay? Hurry up, Huayuti said as she slowly got up from the ground. After being paralyzed for such a long time, Huayuti's body was somewhat not used to it. She staggered before standing firm, but fortunately, Lin Yi was standing next to her. He reached out and held her in his arms. Huayuti let out a low cry and subconsciously held Lin Yi's arm, then fell into his arms. With the soft and fragrant body in his arms, Lin Yi raised his eyebrows subconsciously, and the corners of his mouth curved into a playful smile. Apart from other things, this girl's body was quite elastic. Huayuti suddenly screamed and hurriedly escaped from Lin Yi's arms. She blushed and didn't dare to look at him. She lowered her head and walked forward desperately. Hey, be careful. Don't be bitten by some weird things like 8-legged tooth clasp worm again. Seeing this, Lin Yi hurriedly chased after her. It was midnight now, and he could only distinguish the scene by the faint starlight above his head. Besides, he was in such a dangerous place. He was fine, but it was still very dangerous for Huayuti. Huayuti hurriedly slowed down, but she still didn't dare to look back at Lin Yi. She was so shy not purely because she was hugged by Lin Yi, but because the smell of the man just now made her body a little soft instinctively. Subconsciously, the previous scene appeared in her mind. Although Lin Yi said it was a normal process of detoxification, but she was always a little worried that she would do it again. If so, she would really be ashamed to see others. What the hell is this girl doing? Behind him, Lin Yi shook his head helplessly. He had no choice but to quickly chase after them. At the same time, he deliberately spread out his divine sense in case something like this happened again. If this happened a few more times, time would be wasted. Huayuti lowered her head and didn't say a word. After that, Lin Yi didn't know what to say, so he simply kept his mouth shut. As a result, the atmosphere became somewhat ambiguous in the silence. Lin Yi was still all right. At most, he could only admire this girl's graceful back view from behind. However, Huayuti had obviously become somewhat reserved and unnatural. For some unknown reason, in her mind, the scene of Lin Yi lying on top of her unconsciously surfaced, especially the most embarrassing scene. Huayuti felt as if her whole body was on fire when she thought about it. She even felt as if her ears were about to be burnt off. It was too embarrassing. Although this matter was only between her and Lin Yi from beginning to end, and no one else would know, and there was an absolutely legitimate reason for detoxification, but even so, this also made Huayuti who was an iceberg snow lotus in everyone's eyes, very embarrassed. It was precisely because of this that Huiyuti no longer felt confident even when facing Lin Yi. Her speech was also not as free and unrestrained as before. Instead, it was replaced by a bashful and shy attitude. Even she herself was very unfamiliar with this kind of attitude of a little girl. This kind of thing was simply unimaginable in the past. She was a snow lotus on a mountain of ice. Any man, no matter how outstanding, would fall for her. Any man in front of her, no matter how outstanding, would be involuntarily attracted to her, and she would only disdain them. How could it be like now, where her mind was filled with the shadow of a man? The two of them walked in this strange silence. Lin Yi didn't say anything about this. Putting himself in her shoes, it was normal for a girl like Huiyuti to be so shy when encountering this kind of thing. Only shameless women like Murongzhen or Si Tuqian would treat this kind of thing as a common occurrence. It was just that the silence along the way was really depressing to the point of making people uncomfortable. In reality, it wasn't only Lin Yi who felt this way. Huiyuti's desire to break this strange silence was even greater than his. Otherwise, she would really be immersed in her shyness and embarrass herself to death. Unfortunately, she really couldn't think of any topic at the moment. At this moment, there was even an inexplicable hope in the depths of her heart that Lin Yi would be able to stir up some small topics that the two of them could argue about. This was because not only would that solve this awkward and depressing atmosphere, but she also felt that it was actually quite interesting to have a little argument with this fellow Lin Yi. However, this was just Huiyuti's thoughts. After all, she and Lin Yi had only met for the first time. It couldn't be said that they truly understood each other, especially in this kind of awkward atmosphere. Whether it was her or Lin Yi, it was very difficult to find a suitable topic to divert their attention. Ambiguity would ferment, especially in this kind of awkward atmosphere. The feeling of ambiguity would constantly attack the depths of the mind. This was a normal person's natural yearning for beautiful things. Unless one's heart was dead, the mind would naturally think in this direction. Just like the current Huiyuti, she simply felt that she couldn't extricate herself. Every once in a while, Huiyuti would think of ways to sneak a glance at Lin Yi. Then, she would immediately turn her head back like a thief. It was a pity that her actions, which she thought was not a trace, were clearly seen by Lin Yi. He couldn't help but laugh. This girl was actually quite interesting. Along the way, the two of them walked like this for the whole night. It was different from the expected danger. This night's journey was not as dangerous as Lin Yi had imagined. After all, according to reason, many monsters were nocturnal, and the night was the most dangerous time. However, in reality, it was the opposite. This night, they did not encounter any accidents. Lin Yi couldn't help but guess. Could it be because this was a desert? The night was silent until it was almost dawn. Lin Yi, who was walking at the back, suddenly moved. Accompanied by a light dragon roar, a 5 elements murderous chi suddenly swept over the head of Huiyuti in front of him. Ah! Huiyuti suddenly exclaimed. She thought that Lin Yi was going to do something to her. She quickly turned her head to look at Lin Yi. For some reason, she didn't know why, but she said with a red face, "What are you doing?" "What do you mean I'm doing?" Lin Yi looked at her strangely and pointed in front of her. "Look for yourself. You are an expert at the peak of nascent soul stage. Can you walk a little more seriously?" Chapter 4684. Huiyuti suddenly felt a wave of fear when she thought about how this thing had unknowingly flown above her head without her even realizing it. She had seen the corpse of the 8-legged tooth crackworm before, and the deterrence that this thing gave off was even greater than the 8-legged tooth crackworm. However, at this moment, this thing had already been pierced through the middle of its body, and it was clearly dead. It was clearly the masterpiece of Lin Yi's 5-element killing intent just now. "Thank you." Huiyuti blushed again. This time, it wasn't because of the awkwardness from before, but because of her own carelessness. A true expert must always be on guard, and because of the distracting thoughts lingering in her mind, she had obviously thrown this rule of survival to the back of her mind. "You're welcome." Lin Yi smiled slightly. Ever since the eight-legged tooth crackworm incident, he had been using his divine sense to sense everything around him, so as not to repeat the same mistake. Moreover, Lin Yi had also accepted Hui Yudi as a teammate in his heart, and was not constantly on guard like before. The warning from the Jade pendant naturally included her as a teammate. The two continued forward. After experiencing this shock, Hui Yudi's state was finally a little more normal, and she became more cautious as she moved forward. Not long after, she suddenly stopped. "What's wrong?" Lin Yi couldn't help but ask curiously, thinking that they had encountered some danger. However, there was nothing strange in his divine sense, and the Jade pendant didn't have any intention of warning them. "Something's wrong. I smell a familiar smell, and it's not far ahead." Hui Yudi frowned. "A familiar smell?" Lin Yi looked at her strangely. He then walked past her and said without looking back, "It's this way. You can just follow behind me. I'm not lying to you. I'm very sensitive to smell. There's definitely danger ahead." Hui Yudi hurriedly shouted, "I didn't say that I don't believe you, but even if there's danger, we still have to move forward, right? We can't just give up halfway because of a little danger, right?" Lin Yi waved his hand. As he spoke, he had already walked far away. Hui Yudi clenched her teeth and hurriedly chased after him. Lin Yi was right. Even if they knew that there was a tiger in the mountain, they still had to go there. It was impossible to obtain a heavenly treasure like the Thunder Xian Vine without taking any risks. After walking for less than 300 feet, Lin Yi suddenly felt a hint of alarm in his heart. At the same time, the Jade Pendant's warning sounded. He immediately shouted, "Retreat!" Just as Lin Yi and Hui Yudi retreated, dozens of thick vines burst out of the ground. It was the dummy vine again. "You have a good nose." Lin Yi calmly glanced at Hui Yudi. Because the dummy vine was hidden deep underground, even his divine sense could not detect it before it launched its attack. He did not expect that this little girl would be able to smell its scent from so far away. She had obviously only come into contact with it once. It was simply unimaginable. I've always been talented in this area, and I've also gone through special training in order to be useful in some special occasions. Hui Yudi replied, "Well, in those places where divine sense can't be used, your nose can really come in handy." Lin Yi smiled slightly. "What do we do now?" Hui Yudi looked at the dummy vine in front of her and suddenly felt as if she was facing a great enemy. Although she had retreated in time under Lin Yi's reminder, the problem was that there was only one way. If they didn't get rid of this dummy vine, the Thunder Xian Vine was simply an extravagant hope. Previously, she had joined forces with Renjong Yuan and the others to attack. The four of them at the nascent soul stage barely managed to kill the dummy vine, and all of them were injured. And now, the giant vines of the dummy vine in front of them looked even thicker and more terrifying than the previous one. However, only she and Lin Yi were left. The situation was not optimistic, no matter how one looked at it. "There's nothing to do, just get rid of it," Lin Yi said as he dashed forward. The humanoid vine's hundreds of vines started to dance in a frenzy, as if they were sharks that had smelled blood. They lashed out at Lin Yi with all their might. This frightening stance gave Hui Yudi a huge fright. If it were her, she might have been turned into minced meat with just one hit. However, Lin Yi did not dodge it. His body suddenly surged with a monstrous heat, and his whole person suddenly seemed like a fire god descending to the world, shrouded in raging flames, making people unable to look directly at him. Even if it was a plant that had become a spirit, it was still a plant after all. The dummy vine was most afraid of fire. After discovering that it was not good, it wanted to escape in a flash. The giant vines that were dancing wildly retreated faster and faster, and the offensive and defensive momentum was inadvertently completely reversed. However, the dummy vine was still too late to escape. Lin Yi's frenzied fire fist suddenly shot out, hitting its most vital root. Accompanied by a burst of strange screams, the entire dummy vine was completely enveloped in flames. In just a short period of time, this behemoth that even a nascent soul stage master was helpless against was completely burned, leaving only ashes on the ground. Hui Yuti looked at this scene dumbfounded, and her whole person was completely dumbfounded. She thought that with her and Lin Yi's strength, if they wanted to pass through here, they would have to fight a bloody battle. Maybe they would pay the price of serious injuries, but she did not expect that in such a short period of time, the dummy vine was so easily dealt with by Lin Yi. What are you still doing? Let's go. Lin Yi looked at her and said, oh. Only then did Hui Yuti come back to her senses and hurriedly followed the footsteps of Lin Yi. This time, it was her turn to look at Lin Yi's back, and she suddenly couldn't help but be a little lost in thought. Previously, it was still a little vague, but this time she really saw it. Such a powerful and terrifying dummy vine was easily killed in a second. Although Lin Yi was at the peak of the early nascent soul stage, his real strength was far more powerful than an ordinary nascent soul stage master. In the Eastern Continent Academy, where geniuses came forth in large numbers, it was not strange to challenge someone a higher level, but to surpass such an abnormal existence like Lin Yi, even in the entire Eastern Continent Academy, it was simply a monster. What made Hui Yuti's imagination run wild was not simply because of Lin Yi's strong performance, but this feeling of hiding behind a man and being protected by him in battle made her feel a little strange. This was something that had never happened before. Not to mention that, with her strength, she rarely encountered real danger, and even if she did encounter it, although there's someone like Ren Zhongyuan who repeatedly said that he would protect her, when it really came to a critical moment, he often couldn't even take care of himself. So how could he talk about protecting her? Only the current Lin Yi was truly protecting her. Chapter 4685. However, at least before she was poisoned and injured, Lin Yi didn't do anything in this regard at all. When he followed Ren Zhongyuan and the others, he was just a bystander. After they parted ways, Hui Yuti was also the one leading the way. All these changes started after she was injured. Hui Yuti couldn't help but be a little lost in thought. If it wasn't for her injury, this guy would have been hiding behind and lazily picking up ready-made things. When there was nothing to do, he would just be a bystander. When there was a problem, he would stand up without hesitation. This guy was actually quite manly. But on second thought, Lin Yi might be afraid that he wouldn't be able to get the Thunder Xian vine if something happened to her. So he was so proactive and diligent. Hui Yuti suddenly shook her head with some worries. Apart from pure interest considerations, she didn't think that Lin Yi would like her. After all, from the beginning when they met, everything had been explained. Even if she wore a veil, other men's eyes would unconsciously light up when they saw her, but Lin Yi didn't. From the beginning to the end, he behaved very normally. Not only that, but when he asked for a share, he even extorted her. Especially when he used the opportunity to cure her poison. He didn't have the slightest intention of coveting her beauty. Instead, he asked for a share. Hui Yuti unconsciously let her imagination run wild. If it was another normal man who had such an ambiguous relationship with her, even if the Thunder Xian vine wasn't given to her, he would at least reverse the situation and let her take 80%. How could he be as stingy as Lin Yi? He didn't chase such a beautiful woman and only knew how to hold on to the Thunder Xian vine. If Lin Yi really was that kind of person, then she wouldn't be able to help him. From the beginning, he wouldn't have extorted her. Reverse the situation, my ass. For Hui Yuti's careful thoughts, Lin Yi didn't notice at all. The reason why he took the initiative to solve the problem was that he didn't want Hui Yuti to have an accident again. But this wasn't the main reason. The main problem was that time was limited. He really didn't want to waste too much time on the road. Hui Yuti was a nascent soul stage master. In theory, she could stay here for a full month, which was still plenty of time. But Lin Yi was different. Although he was strong enough to kill a profound ascending stage master, but in terms of strength alone, he was only at the peak of the early nascent soul stage. Who knew how the teleportation formation was set up? If this thing was purely based on one's cultivation level, it would be very disadvantageous for Lin Yi. What if there was a delay on a road? If he was trapped here and couldn't get out, he would really be screwed to death. Since the limit of a Yuanying stage master was only 1 month, then the limit of a peak early Yuanying stage master was only half a month at most, or even 10 days was very likely. This time was extremely tight. If something happened on the way, it would be over. This time it was related to Ning Xuefei's lifelong event. Lin Yi did not want to end up in a tragedy. Therefore, he had no other choice. Along the way, he must cut the Gordian knot. If he could get rid of a roadblock like the humanoid vine in one move, then there would be no need for a second move. In this way, Huiyuti, a nascent soul stage master, became his assistant. To be precise, she was purely a bystander. She didn't even have a chance to make a move. Generally, by the time she found a threat, Lin Yi would have already dealt with it in one move. Being sheltered under the arm of a mere peak early Yuanying stage master, if it was any other nascent soul stage master, they would feel awkward. At least they would lose face, but Huiyuti didn't have such a thought. On the contrary, she felt that this feeling was very wonderful. It made her feel at ease from the bottom of her heart. Lin Yi swept through everything in front of him, and Huiyuti followed behind him, letting her imagination run wild. She'd stop occasionally to confirm the direction and route they were taking. The two walked like this for half a day, and the sky was starting to darken again. Lin Yi suddenly stopped in his tracks and stopped in his tracks. Bang! Huiyuti didn't know what she was thinking at this time. She bumped into Lin Yi's body, causing Lin Yi to stagger. Only then did she react and suddenly blushed. Seeing Lin Yi turn his head, she rolled her eyes and quickly complained, "Why did you suddenly stop?" Lin Yi was speechless for a while. He looked at this chick and helplessly pointed to the front, but he didn't say much. Not to mention, with this chick's figure and elasticity, it was actually quite comfortable to be bumped from behind. "What? Is there danger again?" Huiyuti muttered. Anyway, as long as she looked at Lin Yi's back along the way, she couldn't help but be distracted. She was already used to this kind of thing. In front of Lin Yi, her demeanor as a nascent soul stage master had long been thrown away. She didn't have any self-awareness at all. "It's not dangerous, but you have to wait for me here for a while. I have a friend who seems to be in some trouble." Lin Yi frowned slightly. "Your friend?" Huiyuti was stunned when she heard this. She quickly spread out her divine sense to sense around. Only then did she find that there seemed to be a conflict between a few people in the distance. Among them were Lin Yi's friends. It wasn't too far away from where the two of them were, probably less than 2,000 feet away. At this moment, in a corner of a canyon, 3 men were surrounding a man and a woman. All of them had lewd and sinister smiles on their faces. Haha, I'll say it again. "Leave the treasures in this chick, then I can spare your life. If you don't know what's good for you, One of the men standing on the side of the 3 laughed incomparably lewdly. At the same time, the other 2 also laughed proudly. The 3 of them surrounded the man and woman from the left, center, and right. Behind them was the canyon cliff. Unless the man and woman could grow wings and fly, it would be a fool's dream to escape. Don't even think about it. This was the resolute voice of a man. He spread out his arms and tightly protected the woman behind him. Facing the 3 men, he said fearlessly, "Even if I, Qi Wenhan, die, I will not let you touch a single hair on my body." From afar, Lin Yi couldn't help but laugh when he heard this voice. This was really Qi Wenhan's personality. As the young master of the Heaven's equal escort agency, he didn't have the air of a spoiled brat. Instead, he was as resolute and courageous as a Jianghu hero. He had the temperament of a chivalrous hero. Since it was Qi Wenhan and Xia Luoluo who were in trouble, Lin Yi originally wanted to rush over to help them. However, after hearing the words of these people, his footsteps immediately slowed down. Chapter 4686. If he wanted to warm up the relationship between the two of them, simply being alone was not enough. Perhaps they would not be able to break through this layer of window paper until the end of the trial. The best way was to give them an opportunity, and right now, it was a heaven-sent opportunity. The trick of a hero saving the beauty had been used too many times in the secular world. In order to win the beauty's heart, those playboys had to create their own opportunities even if they didn't have the opportunity. They asked people to pretend to be hooligans to set off their glorious image. This trick was so common that it was not new at all. If he didn't know Qi Wenhan's character, Lin even couldn't help but wonder if these three guys were actors he deliberately hired with spiritual jades. After all, the timing of their appearance was simply perfect. Boy, are you stupid? If you weren't the young master of South Continent's equal heaven escort agency, Master Ian would have killed you long ago. How dare you be so stubborn in front of us? With such a poor strength, how can you be a hero? The other man with the ugly head and rat eyes sneered. That's right. You dare to be a hero in front of us. How many brains do you have? Or do you have no brains at all? Don't you look at the comparison of strength? You are just at the peak of the early stage of nascent soul realm, and one at the early stage of nascent soul realm, and you want to fight against our Master Ian. I'm surprised. Who gave you the courage and courage? The previous man kept talking and ridiculed them. I say, haven't you figured out the situation yet? Our Master Ian is the core disciple of Snow Sword sect in the Middle Island, a real master at the peak of nascent soul realm. Do you understand what this means? This means that now in this West Island trial, our young Master Ian is the strongest one. Now I don't have to waste my breath on what to do, right? The man with the ugly head and rat-like eyes had a complacent expression on his face. Snow Sword sect? Lin E, who was walking over slowly, was stunned when he heard this word. He secretly thought that things in this world were really coincidental. Fortunately, this guy was not Wei Shinjin. Otherwise, today's thing would be really interesting. Well, have you thought about it? The man in the middle of the three, who was called Master Ian, said. At first glance, this man looked a bit like a master. He was also handsome, but there was always a bit of evil in his eyes. He always gave people a feeling that he was not above board. Humph, do I even need to think about this? I'll say it again. If you dare to touch a hair on the Luo's head, I won't rest until you die today. Qi Wenhan narrowed his eyes and stared at young Master Ian. This person was the biggest threat. After all, he was an expert at the peak of the nascent soul realm. Just him alone was not something that he and Xia Luoluo could deal with. TSK. It sounds like you have some backbone. It's a pity that his brain isn't that good. Young Master Ian didn't even look at Qi Wenhan as he stared unscrupulously at Xia Luoluo. He was a veteran who had seen countless women. Naturally, he could tell that Xia Luo's current appearance was a disguise. Just from her temperament, he could tell that this woman was definitely a rare beauty. Xia Luoluo was scared by his stare, and she quickly hid behind Qi Wenhan. Although she was stronger than Qi Wenhan, women were always naturally weaker at this time. Fortunately, Qi Wenhan's performance gave her some comfort. Thanks to these three people, she felt a little hazy in her heart. It was starting to sprout. Young Master Ian also poked his head out and looked greedily at the hiding Xia Luoluo. He smacked his lips as if he was tasting a rare toy. He said to the unyielding Qi Wenhan, "Brat, give this girl to me. At most, I'll just play with her. I won't kill her. This way, it'll be good for you, me, and her. Otherwise, she can only be buried with your boring man's pride. Think carefully about which is more important." Qi Wenhan was originally very resolute, but after hearing these words, his heart subconsciously wavered. He knew that with his strength, he couldn't protect Xia Luoluo. It didn't matter if he died here, but if he dragged Xia Luoluo to die with him, that wouldn't be justifiable. However, Qi Wenhan turned his head and looked at Xia Luoluo. After understanding the meaning of the other's gaze, his wavering immediately disappeared. Xia Luoluo had expressed it very clearly. She would rather die than be given to this bastard. Since that was the case, what was there to hesitate about? I've thought it through very clearly. If you want to touch even a strand of my hair, you'll have to do it over my dead body. Qi Wenhan paused, and suddenly, his blood surged as he roared, "Come." This sound was like a clap of thunder that came out of nowhere. Even the clouds in the sky were shaken a bit. As for the three people who were close to Qi Pai, they were even more shocked. Each of their expressions changed greatly, and they took several steps back. Xia Luoluo's gaze stared straight at Qi Wenhan from behind. Her eyes flickered with a peculiar light. She was also shocked, but she was pleasantly surprised. An intense warmth immediately surged from the bottom of her heart. At this moment, the gaze she looked at Qi Wenhan which became even more tender and sweet. She didn't have this kind of opportunity in the past, so even if she had a good impression of Chi Wen-han, it was only a good impression. She wasn't sure that this was the man she could entrust her life to. But now, she was sure that although the situation was dangerous, there was a lover who was willing to die for her. What else could she ask for in this life? Chi Wen-han didn't notice Xia Luoluo's tender and sweet gaze behind him. He only stared at the three people in front of him. In particular, he stared at young Master Yin. Looking at their expressions, he knew that these people were already angry out of humiliation. Next, there would be a bloody battle to the death. He probably wouldn't survive today, but no matter what, he had to at least give Xia Luoluo a chance to escape. No matter what, he couldn't let her fall into the hands of these beasts. Oh, I didn't expect you to be such a tough guy. I really admire you a little now. After being shocked, young Master Yin didn't immediately launch an attack like Chi Wen-han had imagined. Instead, he still looked like a cat playing with a mouse. However, he didn't want Chi Wen-han to take the initiative to retreat like before. He looked at Chi Wen-han as if he was looking at a dead man. He admired tough guys, but if it was a tough guy who went against him, it was better to kill him. Otherwise, there would be endless trouble in the future. Ah, he's indeed a tough guy. Unfortunately, tough guys don't have a good ending, especially tough guys who go against our young Master Yin. The ugly guy echoed with a laugh. That's right. Our young Master Yin is being merciful and wants to spare your life, but you don't even appreciate it. There are so many brainless idiots in this world, especially this kind. They're so stupid that they want to cry. The other person also mocked. Chapter 4687. Young Master Yin seemed to enjoy the feeling of a cat playing with a mouse. Holding his arms and pinching his chin, he said, "Tut, tut, I have to say that this girl is really the best. Even if she disguises herself, she can't hide her natural beauty. I'm so lucky." Speaking of this, the opportunity to come to West Island should have belonged to Wei Shenjin, the big idiot, but that idiot had to wander around Tiandan Pavilion every day. What a fucking idiot. Hee hee, if it weren't for that, I wouldn't have met such a wonderful girl. It's really God's will, ha ha ha. That's right, young Master Yin. Wei Shenjin is just at the early stage of Yuanying realm. He was valued by the senior management of the sect only because he got acquainted with the will of heaven. How dare he compare with our young Master Yin? The ugly guy flattered. Yes, let's take this opportunity to win glory for Middle Island. As long as young Master Yin wins the Princess of West Island, you will have a meteoric rise. Moreover, Deputy Island Owner Chu will also treat us differently. That bullshit Wei Shunjin doesn't even deserve to carry shoes for our young Master Yin. The other guy also flattered, unwilling to be left behind. You two have hit the nail on the head. If I become rich this time, I won't forget your benefits. Young Master Yin laughed happily. Although he was very powerful, he didn't have any strong backing in the school. So, he hadn't been very successful. Especially in the past 2 years, even Wei Shenjin had become a core disciple of the school. This was something that made him unhappy no matter how he looked at it. This time, he could use this rare opportunity to make a name for himself in one fell swoop. At that time, he would like to see how those snobbish people of the Snow Sword School would react. Of course, even if he, young Master Yin, was not successful in the Snow Sword School, he was still a high and mighty core disciple. As for the bullshit South Continent escort agency behind Chi Wen-han, he did not care about it all. It was just a small, unranked force. Perhaps there were people in the South Continent Sea who would take it seriously, but how could it compare to a large sect like the Middle Island? There was no comparison between them at all. So even if he killed Chi Wen-han here, there wouldn't be any repercussions. Putting aside the fact that he could kill people to silence them. Even if the news leaked out, would the damned South State Escort Agency dare to go to Middle Island to seek revenge? Young Master Yin said as he walked towards Chi Wen-han and Xia Luoluo. There was a lascivious smile on his face. In his eyes, there was only a beauty in disguise. As for the rotten egg in front of him, he could casually squash it to death with one hand. He didn't even bother to look at it. Chi Wen-han gritted his teeth. Just as he was about to attack recklessly, Xia Luluo suddenly rushed out from behind and shielded him behind her. She gritted her teeth at the approaching young Master Yin and said, "If you dare to do anything to me, I'd rather die than live in disgrace." Surprised, Qi Wenhan looked at Xia Luluo's back, and his eyes couldn't help but redden. He didn't even have time to feel touched, and hurriedly rushed to protect her behind him, yelling, "If you have any problems, come at me." Ha 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 ha, what a good saying. Interesting, this is too interesting. I like to break up lovers. It's only satisfying this way. Young Master Yin sneered unscrupulously. A mere peak early nascent soul cultivator has the nerve to say this to me? You'd rather die than live in disgrace? What a big joke. I think it should be called die in disgrace. I'll be fine even if you're broken. After saying that, young Master Yin's aura of a perfected nascent soul cultivator enveloped Qi Wenhan and Xia Luluo without reservation. Under the strong pressure, the two's hearts tightened at the same time. They were afraid that today was really going to be dangerous. However, at this moment, a voice suddenly interrupted. So what if you're at the peak early nascent soul? Are you looking down on me? Along with the voice, Lin Yi appeared in front of everyone with a cold expression. Huiyuti, who was following behind him, couldn't help but feel nervous. She knew that Lin Yi's strength couldn't be measured with common sense. She also knew that this man and woman were Lin Yi's friends, so Lin Yi would definitely stand up for them. However, if it really came to this point, it wouldn't be so easy to end things because the strength of the three opponents was really not weak. Not to mention that young Master Yin in the middle was a perfected nascent soul cultivator. Even the two followers next to him were perfected nascent soul cultivators. Facing this kind of strength, these two friends of Lin Yi couldn't do anything at all, and even if Lin Yi could fight opponents who were at a higher level than him, his strength was only at the peak early nascent soul stage. Could he be a match for these three people? Huiyuti even felt that even if she joined the battle, she might not be able to gain an advantage against these three people, because at that time, not only would Lin Yi's two friends not be of help, but they would also become a burden. The consequences were really unpredictable. Qi Wenhan, who'd been prepared to die, was overjoyed when he saw Lin Yi's sudden appearance. There was finally hope for him. Oh, here comes another weakling who isn't afraid of death. What kind of day is it today? Why do useless things dare to come and play the hero? Young Master Yin glanced at Lin Yi with extreme contempt. When he saw Huiyuti, his eyes immediately lit up. Another rare, great beauty. Xia Luo's appearance was not very clear because of her disguise, but this Huiyuti was different. Even if she wore a veil, it couldn't hide her heavenly beauty, especially that exquisite and curvaceous body. This was a stunning beauty that no man would be able to resist when they saw her. You're from the Snow Sword faction? Lin Yi looked at the three people and asked young Master Yin, who was in the middle with the corner of his mouth slightly raised. That's right. Young Master Yin was stunned for a moment, and then he said proudly, "If you know what's good for you, hurry up and scram. Don't cause trouble for your own faction. You can't afford to offend them." Is that so? Lin Yi smiled noncommittally, and instead of answering, he asked, "From what you said just now, it seems like Wei Shunjin is your enemy." Oh, young Master Yin couldn't help but be stunned again. He couldn't help but glance at Lin Yi suspiciously. Could it be that this brat knew that idiot Wei Shunjin? But no matter what, he clearly had no reason to act cowardly in front of such a nameless brat. Immediately, he raised his head proudly and said, "So what if I am? And where did you come from?" "Oh, nothing much. I'm just sorry to tell you that you can go die now." Lin Yi smiled lightly. In an instant, everyone was stunned. Chapter 4688. Among the crowd, only Qi Wenhan had a matter-of-fact expression on his face. After experiencing so many things in the past, he would never doubt Lin Yi's strength. Although the other side had a peak nascent soul stage and two late nascent soul stage cultivators, and the lineup looked a bit fierce, but so what? Fuck, why am I so unlucky today? Why did I run into these idiots? Young Master Yin cursed with a grin. Immediately, his killing intent soared, and he was about to attack Lin Yi. However, before he could mobilize the true qi in his body, he heard a soft dragon roar next to his ear. Immediately after, he saw a dragon-shaped killing intent penetrate his chest without any resistance. He fell to the ground in a daze and died with his eyes wide open. Fuck! The whole scene was dead silent. This scene happened too quickly and too suddenly. Young Master Yin's two followers were completely dumbfounded, and they were so shocked that they could not close their mouths for a long time. Just a moment ago, they thought that this idiot who came out of nowhere was seeking his own death. His strength was not enough, but his tone was quite arrogant. They thought that young Master Yin would definitely trample him to death. In the blink of an eye, young Master Yin, a peak nascent soul stage cultivator, became a corpse. And he died so miserably and so easily. Was this guy even human? The two looked at Lin Yi, who was still calm and collected, and were immediately scared to the point of wetting their pants. Didn't they say that only peak nascent soul stage cultivators could enter this place? Why did such a fierce monster suddenly appear? Don't come over. We are from the Snow Sword faction. If you dare to kill us, the Snow Sword School will never let you off. The two of them put on a brave front. They shouted hysterically as they backed away in fear. Didn't I just confirm that you are from the Snow Sword faction? You've already killed him, so why are you still talking to me about this? Lin Yi smiled faintly and glanced at the two of them indifferently. Do you know what I would do if I were you? What? The two of them looked at each other and answered subconsciously with fear. Turn around and run. At this time, you still dare to talk nonsense here, then go die with him. At the same time, Lin Yi's voice fell. The silhouette suddenly disappeared into thin air. An instant later, it suddenly appeared on top of the two people's heads. With a kick from each person, the two people were kicked into the ground. Two more corpses died with their eyes wide open. Huiyuti stared blankly at the scene in front of her. She rubbed her eyes with all her might, afraid that this was an illusion. A master of the great Yuanying stage and two masters of the late Yuanying stage were so easily killed by Lin Yi. From beginning to end, there was no resistance at all. Was this guy really at the peak of the early Yuanying stage? Are you sure he's not at the peak of mysterious ascension early stage? He shook his head speechlessly. Huiyuti looked at Lin Yi again with an inexplicable look in her eyes. Although Lin Yi had shown great strength along the way, and could even kill the dummy vine in a second. But to be honest, in Huiyuti's opinion, no matter how strong Lin was, he was at most similar to her. No matter how strong a master of the early Yuanying stage was, it was impossible to be stronger than a master of the great Yuanying stage. This was common sense. As for why Lin Yi could kill the dummy vine in a second, the explanation was very simple. Plants were originally extremely afraid of fire, and it was also in this dry and hot environment. His fire attribute martial skill was bound to be twice the result with half the effort in this kind of situation. Huiyuti felt that if she was also a fire attribute master, dealing with the dummy vine would definitely not be a problem. But now, they could only watch as Lin Yi killed the three of them with ease. Huiyuti finally understood that her previous thinking was really too wrong. A person like Lin Yi was simply above the existence of common sense. A super genius who could surpass several realms and defeat an enemy of a higher level was originally just a legend. Even in the East Continent Academy, where geniuses gathered, it was impossible to find such a person. But now, this legend was standing right in front of her. Her heart was full of perilous waves. Huiyuti finally realized why Lin Yi had been so indifferent along the way when he was following Ren Zhongyuan and the others. It turned out that this guy killed a master of the great Yuanying stage like it was child's play. Ren Zhongyuan and the others still had the attitude of a high and mighty master, but in fact, they were simply being watched by others. What kind of ruthless person was this? Huiyuti stared blankly at Lin Yi, and her mind couldn't help but start to let her imagination run wild. I don't know if this guy will kill me at the sight of the Thunder Mystic Vine when he really finds it. That way, he doesn't even need to share 20% and can directly swallow it all for himself. Huiyuti was dumbfounded. At this moment, Xiaoluluo, who was being protected by Qi Wenhan, also widened her eyes. She looked at the calm Lin Yi with a face full of astonishment. In fact, the matter of Lin Yi had long been a hot topic in the South Continent Sea, and Qi Wenhan had mentioned it to her many times. But hearing it from others was one thing, and seeing it with her own eyes was another. Previously, even if Xiaoluluo was beaten to death, she would never have imagined that the honorary escort chief that Qi Wenhan spoke of would be so terrifyingly powerful. The Heaven's Equal Escort Agency actually had such a powerful backer. A master at the peak of the early Yuanying stage was nothing, but a master at the peak of the early Yuanying stage who could instantly kill a master of the great Yuanying stage was a completely different concept. Even if she used her toes to think, as long as this person didn't die prematurely, he would definitely grow to become a top existence in the 5 great heavenly islands in the future. There was no doubt about this. Xiaoluo couldn't help but remind herself that when she returned this time, she would have to properly explain today's matter to her father. Originally, she was a little afraid that her father wouldn't agree to the relationship between her and Qi Wenhan. But now, after seeing Lin Yi's shocking performance, she suddenly didn't have the slightest bit of worry. As the helmsman of the treasured ship transportation company, her father's foresight was naturally not inferior to hers. As the saying goes, when a man achieves the Tao, his chickens and dogs also rise to the heavens. Qi Wenhan's background and strength weren't weak, and now he had a powerful external aid like Lin Yi, who could casually give him a nascent soul golden pill. His strength was even more frightening. No one would refuse such a person, let alone a businessman with a unique foresight like her father. Hee, looks like Brother Ling owe me a lot of things in your previous life. In this life, you've actually come to help me repay my debt. Qi Wenhan laughed heartily as he stepped forward and gave Lin Yi a bear hug. Lin Yi's awesomeness had long been deeply ingrained in his heart. Even the West Mountain old sect master of the evil cultivation period couldn't do anything to this brother of his, let alone a mere master of the great Yuanying stage. Chapter 4689. Although he had lowered his voice, he did not deliberately isolate it. When these words reached Xia Lolua's ears, she immediately blushed. Even Qi Wenhan, a forthright man, unconsciously became a little bashful. Their eyes met, but they could not help but look at each other. This feeling of being a thief really made Lin Yi laugh. Even an outsider like Lin Yi could see that compared to the time when they first entered the trial, the relationship between Qi Wenhan and Xiaoluluo was obviously a level closer. It was no longer just a little ambiguous. On this point alone, the Snow Sword School's young master Yin and his 2 followers really could not go unnoticed. However, Lin Yi did not intend to let these 3 heroes go. In any trial that did not forbid killing and seizing treasures was always the most basic rhythm. Although Lin Yi would not take the initiative to do this kind of shady business, but this kind of opportunity that was delivered to his door, he would not foolishly let it go. Taking advantage of Qi Wenhan and Xia Luo's gazes, Lin Yi went forward and turned over the bodies of the 3 people, carefully searching them from top to bottom. When all the things were cleared out, he could not help but secretly curse the poor bastard. What the hell was on their bodies? It was simply a pile of garbage. Looking at the spoils of war that Lin Yi constantly plundered from the bodies of the 3 people, Huiyuti, who had nothing to do, could not help but swallow her saliva. These 3 people were experts at the peak of Yuanying stage and late Yuanying stage, who would carry garbage on their bodies. Although these things were not treasures, even in Huiyuti's eyes, they were quite good. Unfortunately, in the eyes of Lin Yi, these things were really worthless. He was in a primitive place like the Lufeng Forest and directly swept away a lot of heavenly materials and earthly treasures like a lawnmower. At the same time, he also plundered so many good things from so many people. What entered his eyes were all rare treasures such as infant ginseng, myriad crossing golden dan fruit, and star ink milk. Unknowingly, his eyes had been trained, so he did not look at these things. Brother Qi, These 3 people are your fortune. These 3 people are your good fortune. So the things that came to you will naturally belong to you. Take these and put them away." After Lin Yi finished looting, he waved his hand and gave everything to Qi Wenhan and Xia Luluo on the spot. He didn't keep anything for himself. Of course, to be more precise, he didn't like any of them. Previously, he could even casually take out something like the nascent Soul Golden Pill, so it was not surprising that Lin Yi would say such a thing. Qi Wenhan and Xia Luluo looked at each other and couldn't help but feel a little happy. After all, these things were already quite good for them. No matter what, the strength of the 3 people was obvious. The things found on their bodies were treasures for the early Yuanying stage masters, except for a freak like Lin Yi. Hui Yudi pouted when she heard that. Lin Yi was so stingy when he was talking to her about splitting the profits, as if he couldn't wait to explode on her body. Why was he so generous to his 2 friends now? Among the treasures that they had plundered, there were quite a few rare things that were actually given away so easily. She still wanted them. It was just that Lin Yi had done this now. She was also too embarrassed to speak. Qi Wenhan looked at Hui Yudi, who wanted to say something but stopped. Lin Yi was generous, and, as a brother, he accepted the things with a clear conscience. But he couldn't ignore the feelings of others, especially a beauty like Hui Yudi who was by Lin Yi's side. Even if he couldn't help much at the moment, he definitely couldn't become Lin Yi's pig teammate. This must be sister-in-law's wife, right? Qi Wenhan greeted Hui Yudi with a smile. Without waiting for Hui Yudi to explain, he divided the spoils that Lin Yi had plundered into 2. One was for him and Xia Luluo, and the other was naturally for Hui Yudi. He smiled and said, "Everyone who saw it has a share. These are all gifts from Brother Ling. Let's divide them together." I don't want it." Hui Yudi's face instantly turned red. She actually forgot to refute the previous sentence and could only hurriedly wave her hands. She quickly retreated behind Lin Yi. "You want it?" Lin Yi finally saw through Hui Yudi's thoughts and couldn't help but be a little surprised. He thought that with Hui Yudi's strength and experience, she shouldn't be much lower than him and wouldn't be interested in these people's things. Little did he know that he was purely judging others by his own standards and thought that everyone was like him, having one fortuitous encounter after another. Seeing Lin Yi's gaze fall on her face, Hui Yudi couldn't help but feel a little flustered and nervous. She lowered her head, not daring to meet his gaze, and didn't know what to say for a moment. "Then you choose a few," Lin Yi said indifferently. As for Qi Wenhan's suggestion of splitting the spoils in half, there was no need. Firstly, he and Xia Luoluo couldn't just split in half. Moreover, with Hui Yudi's experience, she wouldn't want many of the things here, and would at most choose a few. "Forget it." Hui Yudi shook her head and said softly. "Oh, then forget it." Lin Yi had a face of indifference. Hui Yudi stared at Lin Yi with all her might, and was immediately angered to death by him. "I'm a girl, and I'm just being shy to decline, that's all. As a man, can't you ask once more? If you ask once more, I can just push the boat with the current and accept it, really." Although he couldn't see the expression under the veil, Lin Yi could more or less see what this little girl was thinking through her eyes. He couldn't help but smile. "What do you want? I'll give it to you again. This is nothing." If it was anyone else who said such big words, Hui Yudi would definitely scoff at it. However, since it was Lin Yi, it was completely different. At the very least, the strength that Lin Yi had displayed was indeed worthy of this promise. Hui Yudi looked at Qi Wenhan and Xia Luluo and whispered to Lin Yi with a red face, "There are supplementary materials for refining that elixir. Although they aren't very rare, they aren't very easy to find." Even though she knew that Lin Yi and Qi Wenhan were very familiar with each other, she was still very cautious and didn't mention keywords like the Thunder Xian Pill and the Thunder Xian Vine. After all, this matter was of great importance. If it was accidentally leaked out and people knew that there was a Thunder Xian Vine in this place, all kinds of problems would inevitably arise midway, and it might even lead to a failure at the final step. Then, she would want to cry, but have no tears. "Oh, you don't have to worry about this. I have all those things. Lin Yi smiled, as if he had everything under control. From the first day he arrived at the Heavenly Stage Island, he had been working on building a reserve. After 2 years, it had already reached a considerable scale. Basically, all the supplementary materials for mainstream elixirs were all ready. At most, extremely rare treasures like the Thunder Xian Vine needed to be obtained by chance. As for the rest, he didn't need to spend much effort. Chapter 4690. I won't be courteous with you, Brother Ling. It would be impolite of us to refuse. Haha. Qi Wenhan saw that Lin Yi had already spoken and did not continue to refuse. He knew Lin Yi's personality, and even more so, he knew Lin Yi's strength. This was indeed nothing in his eyes. Thank you, Brother Ling. Xia Luoluo blushed and walked over to meekly thank Lin Yi. Since Qi Wenhan called him Brother Ling, she could only follow suit and call him Brother Ling. Don't mention it. We're family after all. Lin Yi chuckled playfully, and Xia Luoluo blushed even more. She hurriedly ran over to Qi Wenhan's side to collect the things, but did not refute him. This meant that she had already begun to accept this way of thinking from the bottom of her heart. Seeing that Qi Wenhan and Xia Luoluo had collected all the things, and after confirming that there were no other threats in the surroundings, Lin Yi finally said his goodbyes. All right, I won't disturb the two of you anymore. We're leaving. Oh, thank you, Brother Ling. Be careful on the road. We'll have a good drink when we get back. Qi Wenhan nodded, and at the same time, he could not help but look at Xia Luoluo. However, their gazes instantly parted as if they had been electrocuted. At this moment, their minds were filled with Lin Yi's words, a world of the two of them. Lin Yi waved his hand with a smile, and immediately turned to leave with Hui Yudi. Although it was good to meet Qi Wenhan and Xia Luoluo here, it was still a waste of time. It was better to hurry on with their journey. After watching Lin Yi and Hui Yudi leave, Qi Wenhan and Xia Luoluo were silent for a while. Qi Wenhan felt like 100 claws were scratching at his heart. His face and neck were red, and he struggled for a long time, but he could not say a word. Don't be fooled by his performance when he was forced into a dead end by young Master Yin and the other two. Unfortunately, in this kind of romantic moment, a person like him would be bashful and timid instead. He was even more timid than an ordinary person. He could not say the words he had said to young Master Yin and the other two, even if he was beaten to death. Xia Luoluo was a little embarrassed. She couldn't help but feel angry and amused at the same time. It was fortunate that she had revealed her true feelings in the moment of danger. Otherwise, with this blockhead's personality, if they really wanted to be together, it would be impossible. He didn't know how long he would have to wait. Fortunately, we met Brother Ling this time. Otherwise, we would really be in trouble. Xia Luo sighed slightly, and could only take the lead to break the silence. Yes, I'm sorry, Luoluo. I was too careless this time. I didn't notice that these 3 people would target us from the beginning. I didn't protect you, Qi Wenhan said with a sad expression. It was really his negligence this time. As someone who came from a chaotic place like the South Continent Sea region, his sense of danger was much stronger than that of ordinary cultivators. However, at the thought of spending time alone with Xia Luoluo, he could not control himself. How could he pay attention to these hidden dangers? Originally, when they left the canyon, everyone scattered to gather according to their luck. He and Xiao's luck was not bad, and they soon found a unique natural treasure, but they did not expect it to become a source of disaster, because the two of them had already been targeted from the beginning. No, if it wasn't for you, I would have been defiled by these 3 beasts. Xia Luoluo shook her head. After pausing for a moment, she suddenly said in a small voice, I really like the words you said just now. What words? Qi Wenhan did not recover his senses for a moment. He asked stupidly. Stupid. Xia Luoluo was speechless and stomped her feet. She rolled her eyes at this silly boy who did not know how to flirt. She could only change the topic and say, that girl wearing a veil just now, if I remember correctly, should be a disciple of the East Continent's Morning Pride Academy. Is Brother Ling also an old acquaintance of hers? I don't know. It doesn't look like it. I only know that Brother Ling's two confidants are Wang Xinyan and Huang Xiaodao. They are both in the Morning Star Academy. Qi Wenhan shook his head. Is that so? But why do I feel that there's something between the two of them? If they just met, the progress wouldn't be so fast, right? Xiao Luoluo could not help but ask curiously. Although it was not very obvious, but Hui Yudi and Lin, he had clearly done something ambiguous. This did not escape her eyes, and it looked like Hui Yudi was the one who initiated it. Really? Qi Wenhan paused for a moment before coming back to his senses. He couldn't help but speak with envy. As expected of Brother Ling, he's too amazing. Even the beauties of the Eastern continent have fallen for him. No wonder Wang Xinyan and Huang Xiaodao are so loyal to him. TSK, TSK. What? From your tone, it sounds like you're very envious? Xiao Luoluo turned to look at Qi Wenhan, her tone strange. This, as long as it's a man. Qi Wenhan subconsciously replied. Only when he felt the killing intent did he react. His brain sped up for once. It's impossible to be like Brother Ling. Someone like Brother Ling only appears once every few thousand years. How can I compare to him? As long as I have one, I'll be satisfied. I can die without regrets. That's more like it. Xiao Luoluo's lips curled into a slight smile. Although she had disguised herself, the flirtatious look she showed in that instant still made Qi Wenhan completely dumbfounded. Seeing Qi Wenhan's expression, Xiao Luoluo could not help but lower her head shyly. She really was an idiot. On the other side, after Hui Yudi had followed Lin Yi for a while, she finally could not help but ask, Hey, after we find a Thunder Mystic Vine, you won't kill me, will you? Lin Yi, who was leading the way, lost his footing when he heard that. He was completely shocked by this girl's wild thoughts. What is she even talking about? Lin Yi turned around, speechlessly glancing at this girl who had no idea what she was thinking. With a mischievous face, he said, If you want to kill, you should kill first. I see. Then can you just kill without killing? Hui Yudi blinked. Cough, cough, cough. Lin Yi immediately choked. Just now, he had only thought that this girl's thoughts were strange. Now he was completely shocked. Just kill without killing? Was this an answer that a normal girl could think of? Wasn't Xiao Luoluo's decision to rather die than submit the right way? Or was it that the East Continent was special, and they've been taught this way since they were young? Compared to reputation and integrity, preserving one's life was more important? Don't think that I don't know that you're not the kind of person who casually kills people. If you were really that cruel, you would have already killed Ren Zhongyuan and the others. Hui Yudi said with a face full of certainty. Chapter 4691. On the contrary, in the face of Ren Zhongyuan and the others' mockery and ridicule, Lin Yi remained calm from beginning to end. He didn't have the slightest intention of arguing with these ignorant people. This was extremely rare. At least if she was in Lin Yi's position, Hui Yudi wouldn't have such a calm temperament. Even if she didn't kill them on the spot to establish her dominance, she would definitely teach them a lesson. She obviously had a body full of strength, but after being mocked and ridiculed in front of her, she still acted like nothing had happened. How strong was her temperament? Little did they know that there was a special term for this kind of thing. It was called pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger. Lin Yi had been an expert in this since the beginning of his career. If a few so-called geniuses who thought highly of themselves could make him impatient like this, then all of Lin Yi's previous cultivation would have been in vain. All right, I really admire you. Lin Yi smiled, looked at the girl, and said, Let's go quickly. Aren't you shy? You're still talking about it. Hui Yudi's pretty face turned red. This guy really brought up her sore spot. After the episode just now, she had finally put that embarrassing scene to the back of her mind. In the blink of an eye, this guy brought it up again. It was really infuriating. Looking at Hui Yudi angrily walking in front, Lin Yi could only shake his head speechlessly. He was puzzled. What was going on? Why did it feel like this girl suddenly became a lot more unyielding? A woman's heart was like a needle at the bottom of the sea. This saying was not false at all. Men could never figure out what a woman was thinking, because this in itself was an unsolvable proposition. As they continued forward, Huiyuti once again took the lead like she did at the beginning. With her strength of nascent soul stage, as long as she didn't become absent-minded, there was no problem at all for her to lead the way. Moreover, there was Lin Yi behind her to protect her. Basically, even if there was any danger in front of them, before Huiyuti could react, he would have already killed it. There really wasn't any threat along the way. After a few hours, the sky gradually darkened again. A blood-red crescent moon appeared in the sky. It was hazy, giving people the feeling that the moon had grown hair. Lin Yi looked up, pinched his chin, smacked his lips, and muttered, "Mao Yueyang?" And with such a strong blood chi, this isn't an auspicious sign. However, on second thought, the land beneath his feet was a remnant of an ancient battlefield. To put it bluntly, it was a supermass grave since ancient times. Killing intent, baleful aura, and corpse aura were all gathered together. It would not be an exaggeration to say that it was the most dangerous place in the world, so it was normal for the so-called blood-colored moon to appear. Lin Yi himself didn't take it to heart. This kind of folklore was used to scare children. However, after Huiyuti, who was walking in front of him, heard his murmur, she suddenly stopped moving. Although she was an expert at the great perfection of the nascent soul stage, she was still a girl. No matter how strong she was still afraid of these legends. Especially at this moment, the blood-colored hairy moon above her head, no matter how she looked at it, it really made people panic. Originally, she was still walking in front of Lin Yi with big strides, at least about 5 feet away from him. As a result, after Lin Yi muttered this sentence, this chick suddenly fell in front of Lin Yi. It was less than 5 feet in front and behind, and if he was not careful, he could step on her heel. But even so, Huiyuti still insisted on walking in front of him in a fit of pique. However, after walking for a while, the surrounding light was getting dimmer and dimmer. Even the blood moon hanging in the air was looming, and it even gradually disappeared in the thick clouds. After a while, there was no light in the surroundings. This was the darkness before dawn. Huiyuti really couldn't stand it anymore. She said weakly, "Can we walk later? I feel a little tired." As she said this, she had unknowingly fallen behind Lin Yi. Because there was not even a bit of light in the surroundings, she really did not have the courage to continue walking in front. Even at this moment, even following behind Lin Yi made her feel a little afraid. Without any light, unless she constantly used her divine sense like Lin Yi, she would not be able to lock onto Lin Yi's position, even if Lin Yi was less than 10 feet in front of her. It was a pity that she was not Lin Yi. She did not have an endless supply of spirit chi, and the strength of her divine sense was far from as tough and powerful as Lin Yi's. If she had to use her divine sense at all times, let alone finding the Thunder Xian Vine, just halfway through the journey would cause her spirit to collapse. But fortunately, compared to ordinary cultivators, Huiyuti had a special talent. She could follow Lin Yi's scent and move forward. It was just that this method could only determine a general direction and could not accurately lock onto him like divine sense, so she inevitably felt a little nervous. Tired? Lin Yi, who was walking in front, was stunned when he heard this. He did not look back, but directly used his divine sense to size up Huiyuti. Seeing that her body was slightly trembling, he immediately understood and could not help but feel a little funny. He said, "Are you afraid? You are the one who is afraid. I have experienced all kinds of trials in the past, and there are many that are more dangerous than this. This is nothing." Huiyuti stubbornly said, "Oh, then rest for a while." Lin Yi found it funny, but he did not insist. Since Huiyuti was afraid, then stop and rest for a while. Anyway, the darkness before dawn would only last for a while. It would be sunrise soon. And Huiyuti heaved a sigh of relief. She immediately hugged her legs and sat down. She was a morning beauty, but she wasn't a spoiled young lady. She was already used to sitting on the ground in the wild. After a moment of silence, feeling that Lin Yi was still standing next to her, Huiyuti suddenly frowned and pouted. "Why are you standing in front of me? Do you want to peek at my collar?" Puffed. Lin Yi almost choked again. He did not know why, but after interacting with this girl for a long time, she could always inexplicably come up with a stroke, making him not know whether to laugh or cry. What can I see in this dark and windy night? She could not even see the figure in front of her clearly, and she could still peek at his collar. What kind of strange logic was this? Oomph, others can't see, but maybe you can. Huiyuti curled her lips and said, you overestimate me. My eyes are not specially trained like your nose. Don't worry, what you can't see, I can't see either. Lin, he helplessly spread out his hands. Chapter 4692. Then what do you think I should do? Lin, he was completely helpless. This chick's clothes were tightly wrapped from top to bottom. Although her figure was graceful and attractive, it was simply a fool's dream to say that there was something substantial on her body. Was she afraid that he would peek at her neckline? Especially in such an environment where one couldn't even see their own fingers? Sit down, but don't sit too far from me. If you sit too far away, who knows if your place is higher? Huiyuti said after thinking about it. Okay, I really give up. Lin, he really couldn't complain at this time, so he could only sit next to her. He couldn't help but wonder how this chick's brain worked. Why was her thinking circuit so different from ordinary people? In fact, Huiyuti's face was also red at this time. She didn't know why, but she inexplicably wanted Lin Yi to sit with her, so she racked her brain to find so many strange reasons. It wasn't that there was something wrong with her brain. The moon was dark and the wind was strong. Everything was silent, and there was no one around. Lin Yi and Huiyuti sat side by side, neither of them talking, but they could clearly feel each other's breathing and heartbeat. It was a very subtle feeling, as if the two of them had unknowingly gotten closer to each other, especially when the awkward scene from before flashed through their minds. The atmosphere couldn't help but become a little flirtatious, and one couldn't help but blush. Huiyuti hurriedly shook her head with all her might. If she continued to let her thoughts run wild, she reckoned that her brain would be fried. When she was with this guy, why did she always think of such shameful things? What are you doing? Lin, he turned his head and looked at her strangely. Although it was too dark to see clearly, he could still clearly feel the other party's shaking movement. Could it be that this chick didn't get rid of the poison completely, and there was a side effect on her body? No, nothing. What am I doing? Huiyuti was shocked and quickly denied it with a red face. She suddenly found an excuse and said, "There are mosquitoes here." Mosquitoes? Lin, he was suddenly stunned. How could there be mosquitoes in this barren land? Even if there were, his divine sense was always open. Any movement within 100 feet could not be hidden from the omnipresent divine sense. How could he not sense it? Yes, mosquitoes. Huiyuti bit to death. Afraid that Lin he would continue to question her, she quickly changed the topic. Do you know, I have never known who my parents are since I was young. The only reason I'm still alive is because Master found me in the wild. Otherwise, I would have been an abandoned baby, and not even my bones would have been left. Oh, I'm about the same as you. Lenny nodded. He didn't expect that this girl would have such a life experience. She seemed to be in the same boat as him. You. Didn't you come from the secular world? Huiyuti couldn't help but be surprised, but she immediately realized that she had asked a stupid question. Whether or not they came from the secular world had nothing to do with their origins. There were abandoned babies on Heaven Stage Island, so naturally, there were also abandoned babies in the secular world. Yes, I have a grandfather in the secular world who is half a master and half a senior, including medical skills. He was the one who taught me all kinds of miscellaneous things that I have. At that time, I was tormented by him a lot. Lenny couldn't help but sigh. After coming to Heaven Stage Island for so long, he didn't know how Old Man Lin was doing now. However, what made him feel more at ease was that, from the replies from the people in the secular world, Old Man Lin was living quite comfortably in the West Star Mountain village, and Aunt Ching was finally with him. From this point of view, Old Man Lin was actually quite lucky, and there was really nothing to worry about. Me too. Master is the same to me. Without her, I wouldn't be who I am today. Huiyuti nodded repeatedly. With such a similar life experience, she suddenly felt that the distance between her and Lin was closer. Maybe they would have a lot in common. After a pause, she changed the topic and asked, "Then, do you want to go back to the secular world? Is this place better or the secular world better?" "Naturally, the secular world," Lin Yi answered without hesitation. It was true that in terms of strength and cultivation conditions, 10,000 secular worlds couldn't compare to one heaven stage island. However, he always believed that the secular world was his root. Without the secular world, there would be no him, and he wouldn't have reached his current level. Moreover, most of the women he cared about the most were in the secular world. The eldest miss and the others were still waiting for him to go back and save them. Therefore, no matter what, even if he had to pay all the price, he must return to the secular world. This was his greatest wish and goal. Why? Is it because there are rich men and universities there? Huiyuti suddenly asked curiously. Of both. He almost choked again. Why is this girl so persistent about rich men? I just mentioned it casually at the beginning, but I didn't expect her to keep it in mind. As for universities, it was probably because he mentioned it casually that she remembered it. However, from this point alone, it could be seen that this girl should be quite interested in the secular world. It felt similar to Shangwan Laner. They were the kind of people who were full of fantasies and longing for the secular world. No wonder. That guy Ren Zhongyuan always likes to go to the Central Chamber of Commerce to buy some strange things. He said that they are all imported goods from the secular world. They are all very useful. It seems to be very popular recently. When Huiyuti said this, she couldn't help but think of the camera. It was a good thing that Ren Zhongyuan spent a lot of money to buy. At first, when he said that he would give it to her, she was actually very interested and almost accepted it on the spot. However, in the end, her disgust for this guy prevailed. She gritted her teeth and pushed the camera back. Now that she thought about it, although she didn't regret it, she still felt a little regretful. Well, you can say that. Lenny nodded. The biggest role of the Central Chamber of Commerce after its emergence was to set off a wave of technology on Heaven Stage Island. This greatly improved the status of the secular world on Heaven Stage Island. Now, when the secular world was mentioned again, at least no one would say that the secular world was useless. As far as these technological products were concerned, although they weren't like divine weapons or elixirs that could play a substantial role for cultivators, many of their functions were still very practical. Even the top big shots on Heaven Stage Island had to admit that in some aspects, even high-level cultivators were inferior to them. For example, the camera and the mobile phone that Lin Yi carried. Chapter 4693. As for the mobile phone, although Lin Yi had not personally tested whether there was a signal or not, if there was no such thing, it was impossible to achieve long-distance communication. The so-called 1,000-mile sound transmission was just an illusory legend. In reality, no one had seen it. Strictly speaking, the mobile phone was the real 1,000-mile sound transmission. If there is a chance, Huiyuti suddenly said. Lenny frowned and waited for her to continue. If there's a chance, take me. Huiyuti was still hesitating. The more she spoke, the more shy she became. In the end, her voice was so low that it could not be heard. Only she could guess. He turned his head and looked at her strangely. Although it was too dark to see clearly, he still subconsciously made this action. What does this chick want to express? Why is he acting so bashful? Could it be something very embarrassing? That shouldn't be the case, right? Although they had that awkward scene, he felt that this chick should be a traditional woman in her bones. If there's a chance, take me to the secular world. When he couldn't help but let his imagination run wild, Huiyuti finally finished her words. However, her voice was so low that even he could barely hear it. You want to go to the secular world? He couldn't help but be surprised. This sentence was a bit familiar. In his memory, Shanghai Laner seemed to have said something similar. If you don't want to take me, then forget it. I'm just curious. Huiyuti pouted. If you want to go, of course you can, but the premise is that I can go back. It is not easy to go from the secular world to the heavenly island. It is even more difficult to go back from the heavenly island to the secular world. We will see when the time comes. Lenny sighed. Although this chick's brain was strange and a little incomprehensible, he didn't hate it. At least from the bottom of his heart, he had begun to treat this chick as a friend, not a purely beneficial partner. Yeah, I have never heard of anyone who can go back. She heard Lin Yi sigh. Hui Yuti hurriedly explained, I'm just saying, I don't have any other meaning. Don't take it seriously. Since you've already said it, how can I not take it seriously? Let's see if there's a chance. If I can go back, I'll call you. Lin Yi smiled. Although it was indeed very difficult to return to the secular world from Heaven Stage Island, according to the information he currently had, it would be very difficult. In fact, the probability of success was not as low as one would imagine. Thinking about it carefully, there were at least 3 options. The first option was also the most reliable one, and that was to find Zhang Liju. That damn thing's personal experience had proven that he had a reliable way, and with his relationship with Zhang Liju, as long as he could find him, he believed that Zhang Liju wouldn't reject him right away. The only difficulty was when they would be able to meet this legendary figure who was elusive and elusive. As for the second method, it fell on the Central Chamber of Commerce. It was very clear that the Central Chamber of Commerce had a way to freely travel between Heaven Stage Island and the secular world. If they could find a way to find out, naturally, Lin Yi would have a chance. However, this method was much more difficult than the first one. After all, the Central Chamber of Commerce had a lot of strong practitioners. Although Lin Yi could kill profound ascension practitioners in seconds, if he really went in, he would still end up as a corpse on the street. As for the third method, it fell on Han Jingjing. Although it was a bit ridiculous for her to research the mystery of the teleportation circle between Heaven Stage Island and the secular world, which of her previous research wasn't a miracle as long as she had enough conditions and time. Lin Yi really didn't think that this was impossible. And Hui Yuti couldn't help but feel a little happy, although she knew in her heart that after the West Island trial ended, she and Lin Yi wouldn't have much interaction, but after hearing this, she felt a little expectant. If only she could really go to the secular world with this guy. As the two talked, the sky gradually brightened. Although the visibility was still not high, at least it wasn't as dark as before. After talking with Lin Yi for a while, Hui Yuti was finally not afraid anymore, and the two immediately got up and continued on their way. However, not long after they walked, Lin Yi suddenly heard a soft rumbling sound beside him. He couldn't help but look towards the sound and saw Hui Yuti with her head down and her face red. She was almost looking for a hole to hide in. Are you hungry? The corner of Lin Yi's mouth curled up a little. Practitioners don't need to eat? I'm not hungry. Hui Yuti still had her head down and didn't dare to look at anyone, but she said it quite firmly. He. Lin Yi shook his head with a faint smile. Although it was true that practitioners didn't need to eat, it didn't mean that they really didn't eat. This was an innate instinct. Even if the body wasn't hungry, it would still have this reaction unconsciously after a long time. Just like Hui Yuti's stomach growling, this was a clear proof. If practitioners really didn't need to eat, so many high-end restaurants on the Heaven Stage Island would have been closed long ago. How could it be seen everywhere now? Lin Yi felt that the various kinds of delicacies on the Heaven Stage Island were no worse than those in the secular world. Some of them were even sold at a very high price, and there were still many diners and guests. Lin Yi suddenly took out some extremely delicate and delicious pastries, turned his head, and handed them to Hui Yuti, saying, Here, satisfy your craving. Where did you get them from? Hui Yuti's eyes widened in disbelief. Her throat squirmed uncontrollably, and she almost drooled. I conjured them. Lin Yi smiled mysteriously. Hui Yuti couldn't help but be startled. She'd been watching him the whole time, and this guy clearly didn't bring anything with him. He didn't even have a normal backpack, and he came empty-handed. It wasn't strange for him to have some small treasures on him, but where did these delicate-looking pastries come from? Hui Yuti thought to herself. It couldn't really be conjured out of thin air, right? She had never heard of such a magical power in the world. All right, don't be silly. Since there are ready-made ones, eat them quickly. Lin said and started eating first. Wait, leave some for me. Huayudi looked really greedy and immediately stopped thinking about how these things were conjured. She quickly snatched a piece from Lin Yi's hand and ate it in small bites. Chapter 4694. Lin Yi looked at Huayudi's careful eating and couldn't help but smile. These exquisite pastries were actually put into the jade space from the envoy's mansion in West Island. Anyway, the space was very large. Now, he put whatever he saw in it so that he could be prepared. The two divided the pastries Lin Yi took out. After eating, Huayudi wiped the corner of her mouth with some desire. At this time, Lin Yi suddenly said, "Do you want more?" You have more?" Huayudi was shocked again. She looked at Lin Yi up and down as if she was looking at a monster. What was this guy made of? He didn't even carry a bag when he went out. How could he hide so many pastries at will? "Yes, if you want to eat, I will definitely make sure you are full." Lin Yi nodded. "Ugh, I think I'll pass." Huayudi shook her head after some hesitation. Eating was just a habit to her, and it wasn't necessary for her to eat too much. A girl eating so much in front of others would be laughed at. She didn't know why, but she didn't want to be laughed at by this guy. Oh, then forget it. Lin Yi put it away indifferently. Huayudi suddenly felt depressed again. Why was this guy like this every time? Once he said no, he immediately let it go. Couldn't he ask again? Didn't he know that girls should be more reserved? What the hell was this chick doing? Seeing Huayudi sulking and walking away, Lin Yi couldn't help but shake his head helplessly. Women were difficult to understand, and this chick changed every now and then. It was especially difficult to understand. However, Lin Yi didn't need to understand. He was with Huayudi purely for the Thunder Xianrat. As long as it didn't interfere with his fundamental purpose, he would let this chick do whatever she wanted. The two hurried on their way again. As a result, after walking for less than an hour, the scene in the distance suddenly changed. That place was the opposite of the barren scene in the surrounding places. It was lush and green. It was like a fairyland on earth. Oasis. Lin Yi was overjoyed. Anyone who had walked in this monotonous desert for 2 days and suddenly saw a rare oasis would definitely be overjoyed. For ordinary people, seeing such a lush green oasis in the desert was no less than grasping at a life-saving straw. For a cultivator like Lin Yi, although it was not that exaggerated, his mood instantly improved. He could not help but feel refreshed just by looking at it from afar. Huayudi's reaction was much more direct than Lin Yi's. After exclaiming excitedly, she immediately sprinted towards the direction of the oasis and walked for 2 whole days in the desert. Sitting and lying on the sand, her whole body was covered with dust, and it was extremely uncomfortable. What she wanted to do the most now was to find a clear spring and take a good bath. Upon seeing this, Lin Yi did not try to dissuade her. Although it was somewhat dangerous for Huayudi to run like this, it was not a big problem with him keeping an eye on her from behind. His divine sense had already spread out in advance, so if there was any danger, he would be able to detect it in advance. The two of them quickly approached this rare oasis, and Huayudi could not wait to rush in. However, when she was about 1,000 feet away, she suddenly stopped and looked ahead with a frown. Why are there so many people? Lin Yi was a little surprised and stopped beside her. He could not see anything from afar, but now that he was close, he clearly found that within this oasis that was not considered big, there were actually dozens of people gathered. There, and these people were all gathered in one place. They didn't scatter, and it felt like they were having a party. What should we do? Huayudi could not help but turn her head to look at Lin Yi nervously. She did not know when, but she had already unconsciously regarded Lin Yi as the backbone. Could they also be here for the Thunder Xianrat? Lin Yi looked at her and said, "Those who appeared here were naturally the participants of this trial, and there was only one thing that could make them gather together. That was the treasure of heaven and earth, and it definitely could not be an ordinary treasure of heaven and earth. Only rare treasures like the Thunder Xianrat could cause such a big stir." "I don't think so." Huayudi thought for a while and said, Although everyone knows about this ancient battlefield relic, the information about the Thunder Shenrot Tan has always been confidential, and only a few people know about it. Unless someone spread the news with ulterior motives, it is impossible to gather so many people. If it really causes such a stir, the top management of West Island will definitely take action. Well, it makes sense. Lenny nodded. The existence of the Thunder Shenrot Tan was a rare strategic resource for the entire West Island. It was okay if only a few people inside knew about it, but if it really caused an uproar and everyone knew about it, West Island would inevitably fall into chaos. Ning Shangling might even directly give a kill order. At that time, it was estimated that none of these trial takers who knew the news would survive. It was related to the core interests of the entire West Island, and there was no room for mercy. Although we took the shortest route, after all, we were delayed for a day, so these people probably came here from other directions. Don't worry, this place is still far from the Thunder Shenrot Tan. Huiyuti comforted him. That's good. Lin Yi breathed a sigh of relief and looked ahead with a frown. But something must have happened there, or it is impossible for so many people to gather here. Let's be careful. Okay. Huiyuti also looked dignified. Although the oasis would naturally attract people to stop, it was definitely not a small matter that so many people gathered here inexplicably. Even if it had nothing to do with the Thunder Shenrot Tan, they could not take it lightly. This is the only way, right? Lin Yi asked. Yes, our destination is after the 10,000-year canyon, and this oasis is the only entrance to the 10,000-year canyon. Huiyuti nodded and said, then there's no other choice. Let's go. He took the lead and walked forward. Although there was definitely something wrong with this abnormal situation, it was just as I said before. A trial of this level was not difficult at all for him. At most, it was just a matter of luck. As for the danger, if he could not handle it with his strength, then the other trial takers would have died long ago. Huiyuti carefully followed behind Lin Yi. She was not nervous in her heart, but instead had an intoxicating sense of security. Although this old-fashioned man was often unromantic, it had to be said that at least he gave people the feeling that he was very reliable. The two of them entered the oasis with caution. As soon as they entered the shade of the trees, they immediately felt a refreshing feeling of enlightenment, making them feel comfortable from head to toe. The tiredness from the journey was instantly swept away, and their entire body and mind involuntarily relaxed. Chapter 4695. Although the concentration of spiritual qi in this place could not be compared with that in the Five Poison Swamp, it was still very rare. It was even much better than some specially built caves in the North Island. This oasis is the throat of the 10,000 years Grand Canyon. All the spiritual qi in and out of the 10,000 years Grand Canyon will gather here. That's why it's so rich. It's also because of this that this oasis appeared. Otherwise, it would definitely be a desert. Huiyuti explained behind him. It could be seen that in order to obtain the Thunder Shenrot Tan, this girl had done a lot of research on this place. After all, unlike Lin Yi, the primordial battlefield was still very dangerous for a perfected nascent soul cultivator like her. This oasis was not large, only a little more than 1,000 feet in radius. However, in such a small area, there were dozens of high-level cultivators gathered. Except for a few experts in the peak of the Gold Core realm, most of them were experts in the original infant realm. This was the mainstream strength of this trial. These people were gathered together at the moment, as if they were facing something together. Their faces were very dignified. Could it be that there was a terrible spirit beast blocking the way? Lin Yi and Huiyuti's appearance didn't cause any commotion, nor did they attract anyone's attention. At this moment, everyone's attention was on the empty space in front of them. There weren't any frightening spirit beasts there, but a group of practitioners. It was just that this group of people had a ferocious aura, and they weren't friendly people. Following the gaze of the crowd, Lin Yi glanced forward, and then his eyelids twitched unconsciously. He was extremely shocked. The leader of the group in front of him, a fierce man with a scar on his face, was actually a profound ascending stage master. Lenny couldn't help but rub his eyes. Did he see it wrong? Wasn't it said that only nascent soul stage masters and below could enter this place? Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to pass through the transmission array. Then what was going on with this profound ascending stage master? This fierce aura that was far above that of a nascent soul stage master couldn't be faked, right? Even if someone could fake his aura, it would definitely not be able to hide from Lin Yi's eyes. From head to toe, he could see that this scarred man was a genuine profound ascending stage master. Although he was only at the peak of the early stage of profound ascending stage, this guy appearing in this place. That in itself was already a huge piece of news. How about it? Is there anyone else who wants it? If you want to pass, hurry up and take out your money. As long as you take out enough heavenly materials and earthly treasures, I will let you pass. Don't worry, this 10,000-year Grand Canyon behind me is a primitive land that is rarely visited by humans. There are countless heavenly materials and earthly treasures inside, and it's very easy to recoup my losses. Ha ha! Scarface looked up to the sky and laughed wildly. After listening to his words, Lin Yi and Huiyuti immediately understood. It turned out that this group of people hadn't gathered here to fight over any heavenly treasures, but to meet a mountain king who had occupied the mountain. According to Huiyuti, the 10,000-year Great Canyon was a rare treasure land in the primordial battlefield. Because of the unique environment here, there were far more natural treasures than in other places. If one were to try their luck in the desert, they might not be able to find a natural treasure even after 10 days or half a month. However, in this 10,000-year Great Canyon, there were many natural treasures. It was said that as long as one walked patiently for a day, there would be a harvest. In addition, the judging standard of the West Island trial test was the treasure of heaven and earth, so it was natural. Any trial taker with a little bit of information would find a way to come here, unless it was someone like Ren Zhongyuan who had other intentions. Only then would they let go of this legendary treasure land. Now that this mountain king had occupied the only entrance here, it was equivalent to holding everyone's weakness, and they could only obediently let him do whatever he wanted. After all, in the face of such a cruel and unruly profound ascending stage master, these nascent soul stage cultivators were really helpless. After all, there was no other freak like Lin Yi in the 5 heavenly islands, who could cross a great realm to challenge a profound ascending stage master. Damn it, if this guy was alone, with so many of us together, I believe that even if he was a profound ascending stage master, he wouldn't be able to handle it. It's a pity that he has so many followers. A person not far from Lin, he whispered bitterly. There's no other way. We're really unlucky. We actually met this Scarface man. It seems that there's no hope for this West Island trial. The West Island princess has such a good opportunity to choose a husband, sigh. Another person sighed. Why did this scar-faced man appear in this place? Isn't it impossible for profound ascending stage masters to enter? Lin, he asked quietly behind them. Hey, it's another unlucky newcomer. The man heard the words and looked back at Lin Yi. When he saw Huiyuti, his eyes lit up, but after all, he was wearing a veil, so he didn't show too much of a pervert. He just shook his head and smiled bitterly. I heard from those who came earlier that this scar-faced man seemed to be in the bottleneck of the nascent soul peak in a previous trial. As a result, he got some kind of adventure during the trial, and then accidentally broke through, so he couldn't get out and could only be trapped here as a mountain king. So that's how it is. Lenny glanced at Huiyuti subconsciously. This girl was also at the bottleneck of nascent soul mastery. She wouldn't meet the same fate if she wasn't careful, would she? This place was really dangerous. Even a rare breakthrough could get her killed. That can only mean that his own strength is not enough. Controlling the realm of strength is a compulsory course for all East Continent College students, and it's the most basic. If he can't even do this, it can only mean that he can reach his current realm purely by luck, and his strength is seriously insufficient. Huiyuti rolled her eyes at Lin. Miss, are you from East Continent? The person just now glanced at Huiyuti again. Seeing that Huiyuti seemed to be too lazy to talk, he could only bitterly smile and say, "That's right, but Scarface is a genuine early-stage profound ascension expert after all. No matter how strong a nascent soul stage is in front of him, they're just vegetables. The situation is stronger than the person. What can we do?" Yes, from what the Scarface man said. He has been here for hundreds of years. The group of people around him also came back late from every trial, and in the end, they couldn't get out, so they were all gathered by him and became a tyrant here. These people are all desperados, not to be trifled with, the others said with lingering fear. From her point of view, if we want to get to the Grand Canyon through here, we'll have to give him some treasures? Lin E asked again, not agreeing or disagreeing with the question. If you want to pass through here, you have to pay for the passage. This is the rules set by this Mountain King. If you don't have the strength to resist, don't you have to give him treasures? A person said. Chapter 4696. Otherwise, you can just not go to the 10,000-year Grand Canyon, and they won't be able to stop you. However, if you do that, it will be difficult to gain anything from this trial. In my opinion, you should obediently do as they say. This way, you should be able to get back what you spent in the 10,000-year Grand Canyon. You might even be lucky. Are you stupid? You dare to believe Scarface's bullshit about eating people without spitting out the bones? It's true that there are good things in the 10,000-year Grand Canyon, but you can't just casually pick up all the treasures in there. You can't even imagine how many terrifying things are in there. Even if you go in, it's hard to say if you can come out alive. You want to get back what you spent? That's right. Do you know how big Scarface's appetite is? Even if you go in, even if you are really lucky enough to find something good, when you come out, won't he plunder it again? Will he let you go so easily? Can't you use a little more brains? Another person echoed. The moment they said this, the expressions of the nearby cultivators turned incomparably ugly. This was the truth. Scarface was definitely not a kind and honest person. If he let you in, he would plunder you, and if he let you out, of course he would plunder you as well. This was something that could be understood even with one's toes. If they worked for him for free and even risked their lives, then what was the point of doing anything? What else is there to say? We can only avoid this damn place. Even if the harvest is a little less, it's still better than being plundered by Scarface. I'm not stupid. Immediately, someone had the thought of retreating. Many people had the same thought, but not everyone was willing to retreat just like that. After all, once they retreated, it would be like searching for a needle in a haystack in the desert. Instead of that, it was better to take a risk and seek riches in danger. Sure enough, while everyone was talking in low voices, a man in gray suddenly jumped out from the crowd. He instantly attracted everyone's attention. I am Duan Wuzong of the Thousand Blades sect. I don't have any treasures on me. Because of this, I must go to the 10,000-year Grand Canyon. I believe you don't want to fight to the death over such a small matter. That won't be good for either of us. As the gray-robed man spoke, he revealed a powerful and overbearing aura. He was an expert at the peak of the nascent soul realm. The moment this Duan Wuzong appeared, the crowd went into an uproar. Everyone's eyes widened. The reason they were stuck here was because they lacked a leader. But now it finally appeared. Oh, it looks like a tough guy has come and is ready to challenge me alone? Scarface looked disdainful and carelessly glanced at Duan Wuzong. I wouldn't dare. Whether the others live or die has nothing to do with me. I'm just asking you to open the door. After all, if we really fight, it won't be a good thing for both of us. Someone might even fish in troubled waters. What do you think? Duan Wuzong's tone was hard to conceal his pride. Hee, this guy's going to walk into a mine. From afar, Linny smiled and shook his head. This Thousand Blades sect's Duan Wuzong was indeed a rare expert, and could be considered an outstanding existence among the group of peak nascent soul stage cultivators. It was normal to have this kind of arrogance and confidence. Unfortunately, the opponent was a peak early stage profound ascension expert and wouldn't fall for it. You don't think he's good? Huiyuti couldn't help but ask curiously. In her opinion, This person's strength was very strong. Just as he had said, if they really fought, even if it wasn't a lose-lose situation, it would definitely cause Scarface a lot of trouble. If Scarface was afraid of him, he might really let him go. Of course, Scarface's group is small in number. They can only suppress so many people by relying on deterrence. If he sets a precedent, do you think so many people here will still be trembling in fear and not dare to move? Once the situation gets out of control, even with Scarface's strength, he won't be able to control it. Then he will completely fail as the Mountain King. Lin Yi analyzed. Then what will he do? Huiyuti asked thoughtfully. Of course, he will destroy this Duan Wuzong with lightning speed. As long as he can establish his power in one fell swoop, no one here will dare to resist him. They can only obediently let him plunder. Lin Yi smiled faintly. At the same time, he put himself aside. A peak early-stage Profound Ascension expert was an unparalleled deterrent to others. But don't forget that he had killed a Profound Ascension expert a long time ago, and it was a one-hit kill. Before Lin Yi's voice fell, Scarface made a decision and laughed. Haha, Laozi has occupied this place for so many years, and there really aren't many who dare to threaten Laozi. Surname Duan, you're a bit interesting, but unfortunately, you miscalculated. Threaten Laozi? Humph. Do you think Laozi is the kind of coward who is afraid of threats? After saying that, Scarface suddenly let out a long roar and immediately attacked. Duan Wuzong was shocked. He stood up not to fight Scarface, but simply to make the other party feel that he was not to be trifled with. So he retreated. Who would have thought that the other party would not even spare him a glance? Now that he was riding a tiger, he had no choice but to fight. Clang, clang, clang. Accompanied by an ear-piercing sound of metal colliding, a pile of divine weapons suddenly appeared on Duan Wuzong's body. All kinds of swords, spears, swords, halberds, everything needed. There were at least 13 of them, and no one knew how he carried them with him. They all floated around him, and the formation was quite astonishing. There was a sudden gasp of cold air. Chapter 4697. If they really fought, no matter how the situation developed in the end, as the opponent's first target, he would definitely not be able to get away with it. He was well aware of this point. So much bullshit. Scarface roared loudly, and the aura on his body suddenly skyrocketed to an extremely terrifying degree. His entire body seemed like an overlord that had descended into the world, and he instantly wailed like ghosts and howled like wolves. The weather changed, and he sneered without end. You still want to mess up the situation? Oomph. With this old man here, can the situation be messed up? Refusing a toast only to drink a forfeit. You asked for it. Duan Wuzong saw this and no longer hesitated. The murderous intent on his body intensified, and the 13 weapons floating in the air all made a sharp sound. He suddenly roared, 1,000 blades, return to me, one line kill. Before he finished speaking, the 13 weapons howled at the same time, their speed instantly increasing to a point where it was hard to see with the naked eye. They formed a long snake and attacked Scarface. Their speed was fast, and their power was strong, causing everyone present to raise their eyebrows. Anyone could see that after these 13 weapons formed the one-line kill array, their power was not as simple as 1 + 1. From the first to the 13th, as they broke through the opponent's defense step by step, the damage also increased. Anything in front of them would be pierced through. When faced with such a frightening attack, dodging was the only choice. However, just when everyone thought that this was the case, Scarface suddenly laughed loudly. He did not dodge or evade. Only when the 13 weapons came close to his body did he suddenly throw out a punch. In an instant, the sky changed color. Everyone could only faintly hear the roar of 10,000 beasts. Their eyes looked at the faint shadow that appeared on Scarface's body. It looked like a tiger, but also like a dragon. Dragon-tiger killing fist? Isn't this the legendary, unyielding, and ferocious fist technique? Huiyuti was shocked. This West Island trial really gathered the elites of all the islands. There are all kinds of experts. First, there was an expert from the Thousand Blade sect, and now there was a dragon tiger killing fist. If they were placed outside, they would all be ruthless characters who could make a name for themselves. Previously, she had thought that this guy's foundation was insufficient. Now it seemed that it was not so simple. Those who could successfully cultivate the dragon tiger killing fist were not easy to deal with. Unyielding and ferocious? When Lenny heard this, he couldn't help but become a bit more interested. He didn't know whether this legendary firm and fierce fist technique was better or worse than his mad flame, thousand-bursting fist. Before he finished speaking, the two of them had already clashed head-on. A loud rumbling sound was heard, and the scene that unfolded in front of them made everyone's jaws drop in shock. A total of 13 divine weapons were penetrated from head to tail by Scarface's fist. All the weapons were destroyed on the spot, and as for Duan Wuzong, he had been sent flying by the shockwave of his punch. For a moment, it was impossible to find him, let alone know if he was dead or alive. The Dragon Tiger Slaughter Fist truly lived up to its reputation. The entire place was deathly silent. Everyone was looking at each other and constantly rubbing their eyes, afraid that they were seeing things. The Thousand Blades sexed Duan Wuzong. Such a powerful expert at the peak of a nascent soul realm was killed in seconds. Who else? Scarface had a sinister and terrifying smile on his face. His ferocious gaze slowly swept across the faces of everyone present. Everyone who was swept by his gaze. No matter how unruly they were before, they couldn't help but lower their heads, trembling like a quail. They didn't dare to look him in the eye. Ha ha ha, a bunch of spineless cowards. Scarface let out a maniacal laugh. He casually sat on a huge rock behind him and looked at everyone's eyes. His eyes were filled with disdain. Since no one dares to cause trouble, then hurry up and do things according to the rules. If there's anyone who doesn't obey, then kill them. No one dared to make a sound. Duan Wuzong's previous example was right in front of them. Although there were many nascent soul realm experts here, those that could match Duan Wuzong's strength were few and far between. If they dared to stand out now, they would definitely die without a complete corpse. What should we do? Hui Yudi lightly pulled on Lin Yi's sleeves. Although her strength wasn't any weaker than Duan Wuzong, it wasn't that much stronger. Facing Scarface's Dragon Tiger killing fist, she would definitely end up the same way. What to do now was up to Lin Yi. Lin Yi was just about to speak when there was a sudden commotion behind him. Everyone turned their heads to look and saw two figures slowly approaching. Lin Yi took a look and his lips curled into a playful smile. It wasn't anyone else but two of his old acquaintances, Su Lingqiong and Kong Mingming. Su Lingqiong didn't have much to say. Other than the fact that his temperament was getting colder and weirder, there wasn't anything special about him. At this moment, the focus of everyone's attention was Kong Mingming. This flashy guy with an AI armor and a laser cannon had already attracted a lot of attention before the trial started. Now, he was naturally the center of attention. Oh, so many people. It's quite lively, isn't it? Kong Mingming swaggered over arrogantly. Previously, because he was too weak, he could only pretend to be a coward. Now that he had obtained a set of super high-tech equipment, his entire person was like a salted fish that had turned over a new leaf. He had obviously become arrogant. Other than Su Lingqiong, his immediate superior, the others, including the nascent soul stage experts, were simply not in his eyes. No matter where he went, he had an arrogant attitude. Suddenly seeing such a weird-looking guy, Scarface couldn't help but be stunned. Of course, he didn't recognize the laser cannon and the AI armor, but based on his beast-like intuition, he faintly felt some fear in his heart. Scarface didn't take the initiative to speak, so the quails that were scared by him naturally didn't dare to make a sound. At this time, a bald man standing behind Scarface stood up. This was a nascent soul stage expert. Among their group, his strength was only below Scarface. Hey, that weird-looking kid, you want to go to the 10,000-year Grand Canyon? Come, hand over the heavenly treasures first. Let me see if it's enough. Otherwise, you'd better scram back to where you came from. Otherwise, you'd better not die here. The bald man sneered. Oh, I was wondering what it was. So it's a mountain king collecting tolls here. Kong Ming Ming laughed indifferently. He was now relying on his super high-tech equipment to look down on others. Why would he put this kind of trash in his eyes? Just as he was about to unleash his power in front of so many people, he suddenly glanced at Lin, Yi, and Huiyuti from the corner of his eye. Chapter 4698. Hee hee, beauty, it looks like you're stuck here and can't get through, right? I've already told you. Although the guy next to you looks decent, he's not reliable at all. He's a pretentious guy, but he's only good at acting tough when he has nothing to do. When it comes to important situations like this, he's useless. Kong Ming Ming proudly looked at Lin Yi with disdain. He couldn't wait to invite Huiyuti again. Beauty, come with me. As long as you follow me, you can go anywhere you want. No one can stop you. Lin Yi smiled speechlessly. Kong Ming Ming really didn't want to give up. He was rejected by Huiyuti so many times, but he still had this idea. He was really persistent. No need. Huiyuti refused without thinking. Before, when she didn't know the depth of Lin Yi's strength, she didn't hesitate to choose to team up with Lin Yi, let alone now. Even if Lin Yi's unfathomable strength was not mentioned, she couldn't leave Lin Yi so easily just because of that embarrassing scene. It was even more impossible for her to follow Kong Ming Ming, who was obviously unreliable. Ugh, Kong Xiaoming couldn't hold it in anymore. It wasn't easy for him to show off, but why was this hot body of a beauty so clueless? Other than acting cool, which part of him was inferior to Lin Yi? Haha, no one can stop you. You're so arrogant. The bald man on the other side sneered. Your appearance is a bit strange, but it's a pity that you're just a joke. People don't even care about you, and you still have the nerve to brag here? What did you say? Kong Ming Ming was holding back a belly full of anger. When he heard that, he immediately turned to the bald man with an unfriendly expression. I said you're a joke. You're really strange. Where did so many idiots who don't know the immensity of heaven and earth come from? The bald man grinned hideously. After exchanging a glance with the scar-faced man, he immediately wanted to kill Kong Ming Ming. They were the only ones who had the final say in this territory. How could they allow this idiot to do whatever he wanted? However, just as he finished speaking, before he could even get into a stance, he suddenly felt a blinding white light flash past his eyes. At first, he did not feel anything strange, but then he felt an unbearable pain in his chest. The bald man looked down with difficulty and found a large hole in his chest. Bang! The bald man fell to the ground in a daze, although his breath hadn't been completely cut off. However, everyone knew that he couldn't hold on any longer. It was a miracle that he was still able to struggle at death's door for a while despite being so heavily injured. Everyone was shocked. Even Scarface, a ruthless expert at the peak of the early stage of the mysterious ascending realm, was looking at Kong Ming Ming with an unconcealable look of horror. He knew the bald man's strength. This guy had been with him for decades. His strength was definitely not weak among the experts at the peak of the nascent soul stage. At least, he was not weaker than Duan Wuzong from the Thousand Blades sect. However, he was killed in one move by this weird-looking kid. From beginning to end, he didn't even have a chance to make a move. Even he couldn't do this. What kind of god was this kid? True Chi manifestation? Someone around suddenly exclaimed. True Chi manifestation? Isn't that a magical power that only the legendary experts can do? That's not possible, right? Someone immediately questioned. Nonsense. Didn't you see it with your own eyes? Can it be fake? This is the legendary True Chi manifestation. My goodness, we've met an expert this time. That person retorted. That's right. What kind of divine weapon is that? It can actually unleash true Chi that can manifest. Isn't that too savage? The surrounding people sucked in a cold breath. Listening to the various discussions that these people made up on their own, Kong Ming Ming waved his hand proudly. At the same time, he glanced at Lin Yi and Huiyuti. True Chi manifestation, this was a good gimmick. Looking at Kong Ming Ming's proud attitude, Lin Yi was shocked. Listening to these discussions, he couldn't help but find it funny. True Qi manifestation? If that was the case, his 5 elements murderous Qi manifestation had indeed been achieved. However, he wasn't some legendary expert. He just comprehended this super martial skill that belonged to the 5 poison dragon from the remnant thoughts of the giant electric eel. As for Kong Ming Ming, he really didn't want to say anything. However, although this wasn't Kong Ming Ming's own ability, this laser cannon was really awesome. Even an expert at the peak of the nascent soul realm couldn't withstand one blow from him. This was a head-on battle. If this guy had the intention to hide and sneak up on people, the threat would be multiplied. No matter how fast he was, he wouldn't have a chance to react. It seemed that he really had to be careful in the future. I say, are all the people from the secular world so powerful? Is he also a personal disciple of some big shot in the North Island? Hui Yuti was stunned like everyone else. She really didn't think that Kong Ming Ming was strong before, but now that she saw it with her own eyes, she couldn't help but believe it. This guy is useless. You don't have to pay attention to him. That's not his own strength at all. It's purely an external force. He shook his head with a faint smile. External force? You mean his weird-shaped divine weapon? But the more powerful the divine weapon, the more powerful his own strength is to be able to control it, right? Hui Yuti was confused. For cultivators, it didn't mean that having a powerful divine weapon would be able to go against the natural order. They must have the strength to match it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to exert the power of the divine weapon at all. Chapter 4699. How about it? Is there anyone else who wants to stop me? Kong Ming Ming looked at Scarface maliciously. He knew that the other party was a peak early-stage profound ascension expert, but he had just killed a nascent soul perfection expert. At this time, he was bursting with confidence. He absolutely believed that with the power of the laser cannon, that Scarface would only end up the same. Everyone's eyes turned to Scarface. Scarface's mouth couldn't help but twitch. Although his strength was the best in the field, after seeing the scene just now, he really felt a little guilty facing Kong Ming Ming. With the speed and power that the laser cannon showed just now, he couldn't find any way to deal with it. He was not a speed-type expert. If they really fought, he probably wouldn't be much stronger than the bald man. The other party was a terrifying killing weapon formed from true Qi. With his flesh and blood, he really couldn't block it. Under the gaze of everyone, Scarface hesitated for a moment. He could only clench his teeth and said, "Okay, I cherish heroes. Seeing that you are strong enough, you can go over." Although Thousand Blades Sex Duan Wuzong was also arrogant before, in his eyes he was just a fart. A mere nascent soul perfection expert could be killed in seconds. But now, Kong Ming Ming had turned the tables and killed a nascent soul perfection expert under him. This kind of powerful deterrence was not something that Duan Wuzong could compare with. If they fought, it would be best if both sides suffered, so he couldn't help but be afraid. At least you know what's good for you. Kong Xiaoming laughed arrogantly. He looked at Su Lingchong beside him, and the two of them swaggered over. As expected, Scarface and the others were scared silly by the scene just now. These cruel and ruthless outlaws didn't even dare to move a muscle in front of Kong Xiaoming. Looking at the backs of Kong Ming Ming and Su Lingchong swaggered over, the rest of the people looked at each other. Their faces all had an envious expression. Sure enough, no matter where you go, strength is the most important. Being strong was really awesome. Even a mountain king could only choose to retreat. At this moment, a man and a woman suddenly walked out of the restless crowd. Looking at their strength, the man was a nascent soul late-stage expert. The woman, on the other hand, was only at the early nascent soul stage. This man and woman followed the footsteps of Kong Ming Ming and Su Lingchong. They did not even look at the Scar Man. They gave people the feeling that they were Kong Ming Ming's followers and wanted to fish in troubled waters. Stop! Scarface's expression suddenly became stern. Being stared at by his malicious gaze, the man and woman who had been hoping to get lucky immediately paled. Their legs involuntarily trembled violently, and they almost knelt on the spot. What were you doing? The man braced himself. He looked at Scarface with trepidation. You want to go there? Where are the heavenly treasures? Hand them all over. Otherwise, you should know very well what will happen to you. Scarface sneered. This. The man and woman immediately broke out in cold sweat. They hadn't gained anything in the desert for the past few days, so they didn't have any heavenly treasures on them. Otherwise, they wouldn't have taken a risk to muddle through. How could they satisfy Scarface? Not willing to take it out? Still can't take it out? You want to muddle through if you can't take out the heavenly treasures? Do you think I'm running a charity? Or do you really think I'm blind? Scarface looked at them up and down. His gaze finally fell on the woman, and there was a bit more lust and greed in it. This. The man and woman were so scared that they almost peed their pants. For a moment, they were in a dilemma. They fiercely slapped their own mouths in their heart. They were so hot-headed that they took the risk out of desperation. This was simply too unlucky. However, without the heavenly treasures, it's not like I can't let you pass. Hee. Scarface suddenly changed the topic. He pointed at the woman and said, "The woman beside you is quite good. I want her." The man was shocked, and the woman who Scarface had his eyes on turned pale. Although her figure and appearance could only be considered above average, this woman was quite good at dressing up. However, this woman was quite good at dressing herself up. She managed to create an 80% effect with her good looks. No wonder Scarface had his eyes on her. What? Hurry up and scram. Are you waiting for me to send you on your way? Scarface scolded fiercely. The man's face couldn't help turning green and white. He looked at his female companion who was looking at him with a pleading face, and then looked at the ferocious Scarface. Finally, he gritted his teeth and said, "Well, a man doesn't need to worry about not having a wife. I'll give this woman to you as a toll fee." After that, regardless of the desperate wailing of his female companion and the discussion of the people present, the man turned his head and walked away. Soon, he disappeared into the entrance of the 10,000 Years Grand Canyon. Ha. You're really blind to follow this kind of scum. Well, you don't look like a native of West Island. I haven't eaten meat for decades. I'm lucky today. Scarface laughed. Although most of the people in the trial of West Island were women, he also knew that he didn't dare to do anything to them under normal circumstances. After all, this was the base camp of West Island. If the news really leaked out, the high-level officials of West Island would definitely have a way to kill him, and that would be a big loss. But now that this woman was not a disciple of West Island, there was nothing to be afraid of. Chapter 4700. The tone of his voice carried an obvious hint of fear. He looked over and saw that it was actually Kong Ming Ming who had turned back. It turned out that after he left with Su Lingchong, he did not go far, but instead waited at the entrance of the 10,000-year Grand Canyon. Whoosh. Lenny thought for a moment and understood. This guy purposely stayed here and did not leave. He was most likely waiting to see Lin make a fool of himself. Perhaps he still had not given up on Huiyuti. At this moment, Kong Ming Ming had suddenly returned. Scarface thought that he had taken a fancy to this female cultivator, and his heart suddenly became nervous. If this brat opened his mouth and wanted her, then what should he do? Should he fight or not? If he fought, the best result would be that both sides would be injured. At the very least, he would not be able to avoid the opponent's true chi technique. Perhaps he might not even be able to injure both sides. The result could be imagined. But if he did not fight, then wouldn't he lose all his prestige after retreating under the watchful eyes of so many people? How would he be able to collect the toll later? Just as Scarface was hesitating, Kong Xiaoming didn't even look at him. He walked right past him and said lightly, "Don't be nervous. This kind of ordinary makeup doesn't for my eyes." Scarface was still in a daze, but Kong Xiaoming didn't even look at him. Of course, he would not have nothing better to do. In a situation where the other party had already retreated, he still took the initiative to provoke Scarface. He still wanted to keep this guy to humiliate Lin Yi, and was waiting to see a good joke. How could he bear to deal with Scarface at this time? This was a rare watchdog. Hearing Kong Ming Ming's disdainful tone, Scarface's mouth involuntarily twitched. Although he was somewhat glad, when he looked at this female cultivator who had been stripped naked in front of everyone, he immediately lost his previous libido. After cursing, he casually threw the female cultivator to the side. The eyes of his subordinates immediately lit up, and they laughed strangely as they rushed forward, noisily dragging the female cultivator to an unknown place. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, Kong Xiaoming walked up to Hui Yuti with large strides. He looked at Lin Yi with disdain, and then turned to Hui Yuti with a face full of politeness. "Beauty, you saw what happened just now. If you come with me, that Scarface won't dare touch a single hair on your body. But if you follow this pretentious old man, then you'll end up in a terrible state. With the previous example in front of you, anyone with a bit of wisdom would know what to do." "Beauty, what do you say? I said it very clearly. I won't form a team with you. You should just give up on it." Hui Yuti refused again without saying anything. Her tone was obviously impatient, and she couldn't help but mutter in her heart, "Is there something wrong with this guy's head? I said it so many times, but he still asks." However, at the same time, Hui Yuti glanced at her opponent's high-tech equipment. She couldn't help but feel envious. If only she had something like that. Blast that scar-faced beast into the air. It seems like a beauty's judgment of people is really bad. I already said that this guy is just a pretentious leader who looks good, but is useless, yet you still trust him so much. Does he really think he has that kind of strength? Kong Ming Ming's face darkened. He sneered at the two of them and said, "In that case, I won't say anything. You can stay here with this pretentious leader. You can leave now." Hui Yuti pouted. For a moment, she didn't know how to refute. After all, the scar-faced man on the other side was indeed ferocious, whether it was her or Lin Yi. However, if he wanted to obtain the Thunder Shenrot Tan, he had to pass through the 10,000 Years Great Canyon. Now, he could not even enter the 10,000 Years Great Canyon. What would he do? Hui Yuti couldn't help but look at Lin Yi for help. However, she saw Lin Yi look at the arrogant Kong Ming Ming, and the corners of his mouth curled up into a faint smile. "Who says we can't win? Let's go, let's go. The monkey show is over. It's quite interesting." After saying that, Lin Yi directly walked forward. His expression was leisurely and indifferent. He did not put the Mountain King in front of him in his eyes. The people beside him couldn't help but look at each other. What day was it today? All kinds of great gods appeared. Another person with a shocking tone. Hui Yuti saw this and laughed. After glancing at Kong Ming Ming, she hurriedly followed Lin Yi's footsteps. Since Lin Yi was so confident, it meant that he could deal with that scar-faced man. What was there to worry about? Seeing that Lin Yi and Hui Yuti were getting closer and closer to him with a condescending attitude, the scar-faced man suddenly flew into a rage. He was the strongest early-stage profound ascension expert present. Previously, with the appearance of a strange freak like Kong Ming Ming, he was afraid to provoke him. That was fine. After all, it wouldn't be a big deal. At most, it would damage some prestige. However, after that, not only did someone want to take advantage of the situation, there was actually someone who dared to say that he was going to leave after watching the show. Could it be that he, a dignified expert at the peak of the early stage of profound ascension, was just a monkey show in his eyes? Or was it that he was simply a monkey being played? "Brat, I want the beauty beside you. Hurry up and hand her over." The scar-faced man strode in front of Lin Yi and Hui Yuti. As he spoke with a face full of lust, he reached out his hand to touch Hui Yuti's body. Only now did he realize that this veiled woman was actually a rare beauty in this world. Unfortunately, before he could finish speaking, Lin Yi in front of him had already slapped him without saying a word. The scar-faced man saw this and immediately laughed in anger. Who did this brat think he was? It would be fine if he used all his strength to launch a sneak attack, but he actually wanted to slap him in front of everyone. Was this guy's brain a pile of shit? The scar-faced man subconsciously wanted to slap back with a sinister smile. His body flickered with the shadow of a dragon and tiger. He had already used the overbearing and fierce dragon-tiger killing fist. It was obvious that he wanted to take Lin Yi's head to establish his prestige. The power of the Dragon Tiger killing fist was unquestionable. However, before the scar-faced man could completely attack, Lin Yi had already slapped him in the face. There was also a soul-stirring dragon roar. It was unknown when Lin Yi's hand had condensed a 5 elements killing chi. Pa! Accompanied by a crisp sound of flesh, the huge body of the scar-faced man was suddenly like a kite with a broken string. He was slapped away uncontrollably, directly flying more than 10 feet away. He couldn't get up for a long time. The whole audience sucked in a breath of cold air. Everyone looked at Lin Yi with incomparable shock and horror. They were simply on the verge of worshipping him. Chapter 4701. He personally slapped Scarface away, and he did it in such an understated manner. With just one slap, he sent a person flying. What does this mean? Even if everyone was already dumbfounded, they could tell that this guy's strength was far above Scarface. Profound Ascension Middle Stage? Peak Profound Ascension Middle Stage? Or even stronger than this? This time, the West Island Trial was indeed a place where the elites of all the islands were gathered. The various gods that emerged were really ruthless. However, this was obviously a mystic ascending stage master. How did he get in here? It couldn't be like Scarface, who was trapped here during the trial, right? Many people had already noticed Lin Yi before. This guy was clearly teleported in with them. Not only was everyone dumbfounded, even Huiyuti, who was standing behind Lin Yi, couldn't help but cover her mouth, and her eyes were full of incredible shock. Even though she already knew that Lin Yi was unfathomable before this, and she had already overestimated Lin Yi's strength, she was still stunned at this time. Lin Yi was clearly only at the peak of the early nascent soul stage. How could he casually slap a peak of the early profound ascension stage? What was wrong with this world? On the other side, after Scarface was slapped away, he groaned on the ground for a long time before he dug himself out of the sunken ground. The side of his cheek that was slapped was swollen high, and it was as swollen as a basketball. Just a moment ago, he was still ferocious and powerful, but in the blink of an eye, he fell into such a sorry state. This huge contrast was really a little unacceptable. Scarface looked at Lin Yi with trepidation. When he saw Lin Yi's gaze sweeping over, he quickly shrank his head and pretended to be a grandson. Although he was very unwilling in his heart, since he was promoted to the profound ascension stage, he had never suffered such humiliation. This was simply unbearable. However, he was not stupid. He knew that the other party could send him flying with a casual slap. If they really wanted to kill him, it wouldn't be difficult at all. After being slapped in the face, Lin Fan was stunned. Scarface actually acted like a coward in front of everyone. This guy was a bit more tactful than Lin Yi expected. However, this wasn't a bad thing. Lin Yi didn't have any intention of killing him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have just slapped him lightly, but would have used his full strength. Although Scarface was indeed an abominable person, with all the atrocious crimes he had committed, no matter how many times he was killed, he deserved to die. However, Lin Yi had no intention of acting for the will of heaven. The cultivation world was a dog-eat-dog world. As long as he did not provoke Lin Yi, no matter what Scarface did, it had nothing to do with him. And the reason why he deliberately spared Scarface's life was actually because he had a deep consideration. Lin Yi shook his head and turned his head to look at the scarred man who had just raised his head. The scarred man suddenly shivered again and immediately buried his head again, which was the complete opposite of his previous ferocious demeanor. Lin Yi could not help but laugh in his heart. After this guy suffered, it seemed that he was ready to pretend to be a grandson in front of him until the end. As a dignified, early-stage profound ascension expert, he was quite tactful. No longer paying attention to the scarred man, Lin Yi immediately prepared to bring Huiyuti to the 10,000 Years Grand Canyon. However, at the last moment when he turned his head, he suddenly caught a glimpse of two familiar figures, Qi Wenhan and Xiao Luluo. It seemed that the two of them had just arrived and were about to find someone to inquire about the situation. At this time, they also happened to see Lin, Yi, and Huiyuti, and their faces immediately revealed a pleasantly surprised expression. "Come, you two come with me." Lin, Yi waved at the two of them from afar. Of course, Qi Wenhan and Xiao Luoluo would not refuse. Although they had not fully understood the situation, they knew from the atmosphere that this place was definitely not so easy to pass. Under the envious gazes of the others, Qi Wenhan and Huiyuti quickly walked towards Lin Yi, while the scarred man and his group of followers, who were blocking between them and Lin Yi, hurriedly got out of the way as if they had seen a ghost, for fear of accidentally provoking Lin Yi. From a certain point of view, this Scarface could be considered a person who knew when to yield and when to stand tall. Of course, to put it another way, it would be called bullying the weak and fearing the strong. And I understand. Brother Qi, Miss Hua, I'll see you later. Qi Wenhan cupped his hands towards the two of them, then immediately turned around and left with Xia Luoluo. After watching the two of them leave, Lin Yi turned to look at Huiyuti and said, "Where do we go next? Is there a shortest route?" Of course there is. Although it's a canyon that leads to the end, this 10,000-year canyon is several hundred miles wide, and there are many places that you absolutely can't step into. If you don't set a good route, you'll have to take many wrong turns, and it's also very dangerous. Huiyuti said, "Okay, then where do we go now?" Lin Yi asked. "Over there." Huiyuti pointed to the right, and suddenly became excited. She said with a face full of happiness, "There's a spring there. I want to take a good bath." Lin Yi was speechless. Although it was a bit of a waste of time, she was still a girl, and she always had some privileges. After being covered in dust for so long, it was normal for her to want to take a bath. He could only nod and say, "Then let's go there. But time is limited, don't take too long." "Got it," Huiyuti exclaimed with joy. Then, like a fairy, she cheered and flew in the direction of the spring. However, it was nice to enjoy the feeling of being domineering occasionally, especially a time like this. "Go wash it. With me here, no one will dare to come over." Lin Yi said faintly. The boulder behind him couldn't block the entire spring, but it could block a large part of it. Furthermore, there was a depression inside that Huiyuti could hide in. This way, she wouldn't have to worry about being seen. "Oh," Huiyuti blushed and nodded. She immediately waded through the shallow spring water. She tiptoed and turned behind the rock. As for Lin Yi, he was like a door god, standing there with his arms crossed. The other challengers that came one after another looked from afar. Needless to say, they didn't dare to come over. This kind of ruthless person should be kept as far away as possible. They must not provoke him. Otherwise, no matter how many lives they had, it wouldn't be enough to kill them. Even if there were a few courageous people who wanted to come over to take a look, with a glance from Lin Yi, they immediately didn't dare to move. They turned and ran as if they were running for their lives, not daring to have the slightest thought. This was the effect that Lin Yi wanted. He didn't have the mood to waste time with these irrelevant people. While standing guard outside for Huiyuti, he simply sat down and cultivated. After all, a woman's bath was always very troublesome. He didn't know how long it would take. As long as he constantly released his divine sense, he wouldn't have to worry about any accidents. After an unknown amount of time, Lin Yi suddenly heard Huiyuti call his name. He couldn't help but ask, "What's the matter? Do you have clothes?" Huiyuti asked hesitantly, "Clothes? What clothes?" Lin Yi was somewhat puzzled. It's my clothes that haven't been washed yet. I'm asking if you have any clothes that I can wear." Huiyuti's tone was unexpectedly a bit coquettish. After she reacted, her cheeks couldn't help but turn red. Except for her master, who was both a master and a mother, she had never used this tone to speak to outsiders. Lin Yi was speechless. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he helplessly shook his head and said, This is the wilderness. Where can I find clothes that you can wear? Use your true chi to dry them. Huayuti hesitated for a moment, and then said in a weak tone, This is the 10,000-year Grand Canyon. I can't waste my energy on this kind of thing. I saw that you can casually take out pastries, so I wanted to ask if you have any clothes from the secular world. And what kind of logic is this? Lin froze at the question. If she could take out pastries, she could take out clothes and clothes from the common world. This girl's logic was truly unimaginable, making it impossible to follow up on her lies. But thinking about it, of course, he didn't have ancient clothes for the women of Heaven Stage Island, but he did have clothes from the secular world. Before he left the secular world, Wu Chintian prepared a lot of things for him, including some new clothes for his female friends on Heaven Stage Island. There were all kinds of styles, and even if he used them to open a women's clothing store, it wouldn't be a problem. Lin roughly considered the figures of the women, and after thinking about it, he finally felt that although this girl's figure was a little hotter than Tian Chan's, it was roughly the same. So he buried his head in the jade space for a while and finally found a set of denim sportswear. There really is something that you can wear, but how do I give it to you? Lin asked. Why don't you throw it over? Huayuti suggested. Throw it over? Then wouldn't it be thrown into the water? Lin, he shook his head speechlessly. Then. Huayuti was obviously a little hesitant, but in the end, she gritted her teeth and said, Why don't you come over and put on the side? I go over? Lin, he was stunned. This girl was so open, and she would let him in when she was bathing? It didn't seem like it. After interacting with her for the past few days, although she was a little unpredictable, and they had that kind of awkward and ambiguous encounter before, overall, he felt that this girl was quite conservative. Even if she didn't view the barrier between men and women as more important than her life, it was definitely not dispensable. Oh, Huayuti's eyes lit up as she looked at the set of denim sportswear. She didn't wait for Lin to completely exit before she eagerly drilled out of the water and rushed over like a little girl. In that instant, it was a beautiful scene of hibiscus emerging from clear water. This caused Lin to stagger, and his entire person was stunned on spot. It was only when Huayuti herself reacted that Lin hurriedly retreated with a blushing face. His mind was muddled, and it was filled with the scene from a moment ago. Shaking his head to get rid of the distracting thoughts lingering in his mind, Lin waited outside for a long time before he heard the sound of Huayuti coming out of the water. This was followed by the rustling sound of clothes, which made Lin couldn't help but let his imagination run wild again. After all, the scene from a moment ago was really lingering in his mind. After a while, when Lin involuntarily went astray, a beautiful and refined figure suddenly appeared in front of him. An elegant and refined figure suddenly appeared in front of him. It was Huayuti, who had just finished changing her clothes. What? You don't recognize me? Seeing that Lin was staring at her, Huayuti couldn't help but whisper with a blushing face, but she didn't know why she felt a little happy in her heart. She even deliberately turned around in front of Lin pursed her lips, and asked, Do I look good in this? Yes. Lin nodded. Huayuti's beauty was extremely rare. Previously, she was wearing an ancient costume and a veil. Her whole body was covered tightly from head to toe, but it still gave people a very attractive aesthetic feeling. However, now that she had changed into a denim sportswear, it outlined her beautiful figure even more exquisite and well-proportioned. Her very slim figure was 120% seductive. Coupled with her youthful and beautiful face, she was simply a very beautiful woman in the secular world. To be honest, looking at the current Huayuti, Lin couldn't help but have a feeling that it was a lifetime ago. Since coming to Heaven Stage Island, he had never seen a beauty dressed like this. Even Han Jingjing and the others also wore ancient costumes when in Rome. He didn't expect to experience this long-lost feeling from this East Continent chick. It had to be said that this chick was really in tune with the secular world. At least if she wore this dress and walked around in the secular world, no one would be able to see through her origins. They would only think that she was born and raised in the secular world. Looking at Lin Yi's expression of being unable to extricate himself, Huiyuti was not angry. Instead, she was shy and a little proud. Along the way, Lin Yi didn't show the slightest bit of covetousness, which made her a little lacking in self-confidence. But now she finally regained her self-confidence. It seemed that she was not completely unattractive to this guy. "Hey, do you want to go in and take a bath?" Huiyuti asked with her mouth pouting. "Oh, there's no need." Lin Yi heard her words and shook his head faintly. His mind suddenly regained its clarity. When he looked at Huiyuti again, his gaze no longer had the lust from before. Taking a bath was like eating. It was not necessary for high-level practitioners. It could only be regarded as a natural habit. Even after a few days of travel in the desert, Lin Yi could use his qi to clean himself with just a thought. Only a girl like Huiyuti, who was obsessed with cleanliness, would want to take a bath. Huiyuti pouted and looked at Lin Yi up and down with a strange look. There seemed to be a bit of regret in her eyes. Lin Yi was stunned by her look. He didn't know what this chick was thinking in her head. He could only say, "Let's get ready to go. Don't you plan to wear a veil?" Ah, Huiyuti was startled. Only then did she remember that she didn't wear a veil. Her cheeks instantly turned bright red. Didn't that mean that her appearance was clearly seen by the other party? Looking at Huiyuti hurriedly putting on a veil, Lin Yi couldn't help but be speechless. It turned out that this chick didn't realize this from the beginning to the end. Once again on the road, the atmosphere between the two of them became a little strange for some reason. It was just like after the awkward scene before. Huiyuti's face was red, and she lowered her head in a daze. No one knew what she was thinking about. In any case, she was silent and didn't say a word. She looked at Lin Yi with pleading eyes and said, "Listen to me. Let's go around the small path on the left. Okay? Although it's also very dangerous, and we'll definitely encounter some terrifying existences on the way, it's much safer than going to Tiandao Mountain." "Why?" Lin Yi frowned slightly. The obsession in the unseen world became stronger and stronger. Although he could still restrain it with his willpower, if it were someone else, they would not be able to control it. Perhaps they would have already walked over involuntarily. Tiandao Mountain is the only place that Master warned me not to go near. Huiyuti looked at Tiandao Mountain in the distance with a serious expression and said slowly, "You also know that this is the primordial battlefield. Then do you know where the core of the trial is?" "Oh, could be Tiandao Mountain?" Lin Yi's eyelid twitched. "That's right, Tiandao Mountain is the core of the primordial battlefield. Legend has it that the strongest existences of the primordial era fought here. As for the other places, they're at most the stands of the primordial battlefield." Huiyuti's face was filled with awe. She paused and said, "Do you know how this 10,000-year canyon came to be?" "How did it come to be?" Lin Yi asked. "Originally, this place was level with the outside world, and there was no canyon at all. However, after an earth-shattering battle, the entire foundation below was smashed and collapsed, resulting in the 10,000-year canyon. Only the Tiandao Mountain under the feet of those peak existences was not directly smashed because it was protected by their aura. Instead, it sank together and became what it is today. Of course, this is only a legend. Whether it is true or not, there is no way to verify it." Huiyuti said, "If it is true, then the people who fought here are really extraordinary." Lin Yi looked at the surrounding 10,000-year canyon and exclaimed. Carefully sensing it, he could feel the remnant aura of the array that was everywhere. This aura was so ancient that it had merged with the surrounding heaven and earth. Ordinary people would not be able to detect it at all. It was very likely that it was passed down from the primordial era. For a mere remnant aura to remain here, it was evident how powerful the array was. However, even with the protection of such a powerful array, this place was still blasted into the 10,000-year canyon. The strength of the instigators was evident. However, After listening to Huiyuti, not only did Lin Yi not have any intention of retreating, but he also wanted to go to Tiandao Mountain to take a look. This was the core of the trial, the primordial land. If he just went around like this, wouldn't it be too regretful? Looking at Lin Yi's eager expression, Huiyuti's eyes became more and more worried. She suddenly asked, "Is it because you really want to go over and take a look? It seems like something is attracting you." "How do you know?" Lin Yi was shocked. "It's not only you. According to the information my master got from the higher-ups of West Island, in fact, many people will be like this when they arrive here. They will unconsciously get closer to Tiandao Mountain. Every time the trial opens, many people will go there. However, after that, most people never return." Huiyuti looked at Tiandao Mountain from afar. There was some fear between her eyebrows, but there was also a faint yearning. If it wasn't for her master repeatedly reminding her not to get close to Tiandao Mountain, she might have already gone there like the others. If I didn't guess wrong, Tiandao Mountain is probably the legendary place where you can get the primordial era's inheritance, right? Lin Yi frowned slightly. Chapter 4706. I think so too, but it's because of this that it's very dangerous. Lao AI. Huiyuti nodded and looked worriedly at Lin. Although the ancient inheritance is tempting, it's definitely not a joke. Even if you're lucky enough to encounter it, according to my master, it might not be a good thing. It's very likely that you'll lose your life. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many people trapped here every time. Even so, I still want to go and take a look. Lin Yi pondered for a moment and said. He wasn't someone who would be easily confused or swayed. Not only was his divine sense strong, but more importantly, his willpower was strong enough. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to hold on until he escaped from the hands of the West Mountain Old Master. This time, he was very sure that the heavenly Dao Mountain in front of him was the place he wanted to go. He didn't know why, but he had to go. This. Huiyuti looked strangely at Lin Yi and couldn't help but feel awkward. She said so much, but in the end, she still couldn't persuade Lin Yi. Although they were temporary partners, this kind of thing could only be decided by Lin Yi himself. Other than that, it was useless no matter what she said. "Why don't you wait for me here?" Lin Yi thought for a moment and said. This suggestion actually made him feel a little ashamed. After all, he said he would go with Huiyuti to find the Thunder Xian Vine, but he had to go to the heavenly Dao Mountain halfway. Not only would it be a waste of time, the key was that he might not be able to return. This was equivalent to standing Huiyuti up. "All right, I'll go with you," Huiyuti suddenly said. "You're going too? How can that be?" This unexpected sentence immediately gave Lin Yi a big fright. If he let her accompany him, then he might cause her to lose her life. Lin Yi couldn't afford that. "Why not? You can go, but I can't? What kind of logic is that?" Huiyuti rolled her eyes at him. She said so much just now not only to persuade Lin Yi, but also to persuade herself, because she also had this inexplicable impulse in her heart. Now that she couldn't persuade Lin Yi, she couldn't get the Thunder Xian Vine by herself. He might as well follow them to Heaven Path Mountain to take a look. Anyways, he might not die. Lin Yi was speechless. He looked deeply at Huiyuti and nodded. "All right, let's go together. Be careful." Huiyuti nodded heavily. After the two of them made up their minds, they immediately changed their route and headed towards the heavenly Dao Mountain. As they got closer and closer, both Lin Yi and Huiyuti couldn't help but feel an indescribable feeling of amazement. It was fine when they were far away. Even though they knew that this was the Heavenly Path Mountain, there wasn't anything special about it from afar. But now that they were closer, the scenery was vastly different from before. This heavenly Dao Mountain was far more dilapidated than what he had seen before. It was even in a precarious situation. If it wasn't for the side of the 10,000-year canyon's cliff, it might have already collapsed. That was not the strangest part. What was truly terrifying was that the surroundings of this heavenly Dao Mountain were actually enveloped by a blood-red mist. He had roamed the South Continent for so long. Lin Yi had seen sea mist, miasma, and the like, but this was the first time he had seen this blood-red mist. He thought that this was an ancient battlefield, where countless powerful ancient beings were buried. Normal people would subconsciously associate this blood-red mist with blood, but there was no smell of blood here. After such a long time, it would be normal even if the smell of blood had disappeared. In fact, if there was still the smell of blood now, it would really be strange. But for some reason, this blood-red mist made Lin subconsciously think of the scene he had seen before. The blood-red moon. Not to mention anything else, at least this blood-red mist that enveloped the heavenly Dao mountain was exactly the same as the blood-red mist that enveloped the waning moon. It was very likely that they were the same thing, but there was no way to verify it. Suppressing the bewilderment in his heart at this moment, whether it was Lin, or Huiyuti, the inexplicable impulse in their hearts was more than 100 times stronger than before. It was almost as if it was urging them to move forward without stopping. If their footsteps were slightly slower, it would heavily hammer their hearts, causing them to subconsciously speed up their footsteps. Lin himself was still fine, and his mind was still as clear as before. But Huiyuti's gaze was a little dazed. At the beginning, she was still carefully following behind Lin, but now she had impressively passed by Lin, and was walking forward quickly. Seeing that Huiyuti's footsteps were getting faster and faster, and she was even gradually trotting, Lin Yi's heart was shocked, and he hurriedly wanted to catch up to her. After all, this feeling was really not right, and he was even a little regretful. If anything happened to Huiyuti here, he would definitely not be able to absolve himself from the blame. The blood-red fog was close at hand, and Lin hurriedly sped up his footsteps to catch up. But before he could pull Huiyuti back, her figure suddenly dashed forward, and she actually used her martial arts technique with all her might. In just a moment, she had dashed into the blood-red fog. Lin was stunned, and in the next moment, he had already chased after her. Then, his body suddenly trembled, and before he could clearly see the scene in front of him, a powerful torrent of consciousness had already surged over, and incomparably messy images quickly flashed through his mind. This scene was familiar, and when he first encountered the remnant of the giant electric eel's obsession, so many memory fragments suddenly surged into his mind. He did not expect to encounter such a thing again today, especially when these countless memory fragments were combined together. The sequence of events gradually became clear, and the scene in his mind shocked Lin even more. It was really the giant electric eel. Originally, he was still worried about Huiyuti's condition, but after seeing the giant electric eel, Lin Yi's entire body suddenly froze in shock, and his entire mind involuntarily immersed in the memory fragments in his mind, unable to extricate himself. At this moment, he finally understood that the thing that had previously attracted him to this place was probably the obsession of this giant electric eel, and it had formed a resonance with the remnant obsession in his mind. Lin did not know if this giant electric eel at this moment would be the same one he had encountered before, because it was almost the same size, and it was difficult to distinguish from its appearance. But at least one thing was certain: there must be a connection between him and this giant electric eel. After a moment, the huge and messy memory fragments that had merged into Lin Yi's mind finally merged into one, and accompanied by the ancient and wild aura that assaulted his face, the scene slowly unfolded. The location was still at this heavenly mountain, but looking around, all the mountains looked small, and all the places that entered his eyes were extremely familiar scenes of the desert. But there was no such thing as this 10,000-year-old canyon. The human expert looked at this scene with some fear. However, before he could react, a deep purple lightning that was almost black suddenly fell from the sky and instantly penetrated his real chi shield. With just this, a super expert above the sea-splitting stage was directly smashed into charcoal. Lin looked at this amazing scene and was completely stunned. He had already experienced the horror of the giant electric eel. Back then, he had fought with the five poisons flood dragon at the bottom of the sea. There was no doubt that its strength was terrible. However, everything was far less shocking than this. A black lightning falling from the sky and killing an existence of the same level was simply the legendary heaven's punishment. To be precise, this was probably much more terrible than the heaven's punishment. At least, no matter how powerful the heaven's punishment was, it was impossible to kill a sea-splitting stage expert in one fell swoop, let alone an existence above them. After the black lightning killed the human expert, the giant electric eel did not stay idle, because at this moment, another 3 existences of the same level were staring at it. The woman in white who was playing the zither on the ground, the 9-headed ancient snake demon, and an unknown super sea beast. Each of them was an existence above the sea-splitting stage. At this moment, because of the movement just now, they were staring at the giant electric eel. Perhaps because of fear, the 3 of them chose to join forces to besiege it. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.